And that grenade bounced right off of that and rolled right back out. But I remember the concussion hitting me. My hearing was gone. And I remember they kept telling me to shoot. My name is Sam Williams. I'm a United States Marine. I joined in 1999. I got out in 2012, so I served for 13 years. And the highest rank I achieved was a sergeant. I was born in Lubbock, Texas, in a trailer park, and I was raised on a farm in northern Michigan. So I often joke that I'm a redneck by birthright because I really did grow up with guys who chew tobacco and have gun racks in their trucks. And, you know, the first day of hunting season was a holiday. We didn't go to school that day. You know, we all wore camo and rode snowmobiles and dirt bikes and all that kind of stuff. So growing up on the farm in northern Michigan, it was this old family farm. We found newspapers in the walls for insulation. That had, you know, Edison creating things and Billy the Kid was still at large and that type of stuff. It was a really old, drafty farmhouse. Freezing cold in the wintertime, super drafty and whatnot, and burning hot in the summertime. Ironically, for northern Michigan, you wouldn't think that, but northern Michigan can get pretty hot in the summertime. My dad was an alcoholic, so he was out of the house when I was 5. My mom, she was a single mom. She raised 3 kids. We were all we had growing up. It was just me, my brother, and sister. I'm the youngest of 3. You can imagine when it's just a small little group like that where my mom's working and going to school. She was taking 19 credit hours at school, working full time. You know, we never saw her, so we were all we had. So we were really close growing up. I think 1988 was the hardest time for us because that's when she was out of the house all the time. And my brother and sister actually had a scholarship to a private school in town. So my 1st and 2nd grade year, I was on my own completely. And I used to cry myself to sleep every night. And my mom would get home with my brother and sister around 10 p.m. I was already asleep by then, and she'd be out the door by 5 a.m. And I wasn't up yet. So I was dressing myself and figuring out what to eat and all that type of stuff. We heated with wood, so I learned how to chop wood and start fires and everything to keep the house warm when I was 8 years old. So I've got abandonment issues, you know. As a result of that, in the summer times, we always had this make-believe land that we would go to called Strawberryville. And we'd had all of our stuffed animals, and we all had characters with the stuffed animals. And the portal to Strawberryville was what we called the chirk tree. And the reason why we call it that is because that's where all the chickens we had would roost at night. And that's the sound that we thought they made was chirk chirk. So we called it the chirk tree, and we'd go and we'd roost in the tree with the chickens, and then we would transport ourselves to Strawberryville, and then we'd escape the hell that was our childhood. And then we would play in Strawberryville all day. It worked out pretty good until, of course, we were a little bit older and we started realizing, like, there is a harsh reality that we got to deal with, you know. And it was nice, kind of our way to kind of therapize ourselves, you know, and get through the hard times. Then in 1989, our house burnt. We didn't have anything to begin with, but when the house burnt, we lost everything. We were homeless for several months, staying in homeless shelters, things like that. And I remember kind of my character when I was a kid. I was very nonchalant about everything. And so I remember my brother was burning cobwebs in this old house with a propane torch. And the cobwebs caught fire and shot up, and, you know, the house went up like a tinderbox. And I remember I was in the living room with my sister. My mom and my brother are in there trying to fight the fire and try to put it out. I remember when I could, like, feel the heat coming into the living room and I could hear the crackling. I'm like, this is probably getting out of hand. So at the ripe age of 9, I walk in and I'm like, hey, Mom, I'm going to take my sister Grace and we're going to go out to the car. And she was like, yeah, you need to do that. And I could tell the look on her face, like, it's getting out of hand and she's realizing we're going to lose the house. And my brother is, like, beside himself because he thinks he's destroyed our lives at this point. So we get out to the car and I told my sister, I said, if it hits the attic vents, then we're going to lose the house. And about 10 seconds after that, we're sitting in the car, and I remember seeing those flames start to lick out of the attic vent, and I'm like, yeah, it's gone. And sure enough, my brother and my mom came out, and we just sat in the car and watched the house go up until the fire department got there. And then they carted us off, and we stayed at a homeless shelter that night. I guess it reflamed like 4 times, so they wouldn't let us go back to the house for like about a week because they're afraid it was going to reflame again. But when we came back to the house, the entire roof was gone, the upper floor was gone, and half the downstairs was gone. So we didn't have any place to go, and the homeless shelter was terrible, and the pea-stained mattresses, and, like, it looked like someone had been murdered in, like, one of the rooms. I mean, it was just bad. So what my mom opted to do that year was we actually We got a tent. My mom and my sister stayed in a travel trailer on property, and my brother and I stayed in a tent on property. And we stayed that whole summer living in the tent, and we would shower in the travel trailer while we rebuilt the house. And we wound up staying in that tent. I mean, we were under a timeline, I remember, because the snow fell that next year, and we were still living in the tent. Probably around December time frame, I remember walking down into the tent from the snow, because in Michigan the snow is going to pile up pretty high, so we'd walk down into the tent. That's where we were sleeping, and my mom was like, okay, you guys have to move into the travel trailer. So you got 4 of us packed into this tiny little travel trailer, little pop-up kind of travel trailer, and we stayed that final winter. That was 9 that year. Stayed that final winter in the travel trailer while we finished getting the house rebuilt, because we were broke. We didn't have enough money to put a roof on or anything like that, so we were piecemealing everything we could to get the house livable again. And then I remember the first year I stayed back in the house, my room still had burnt walls in it. It was a rough childhood when you think about it, but at the same time, like, I don't look back at it like I was traumatized by it. I'm sure a psychiatrist would probably say, yeah, you're completely traumatized by it. But to me, it was just kind of par for the course. That was reality. This day and age, families don't really get that close anymore, but if you could picture, it was almost like the same family dynamic that you would have during the Great Depression, where like everybody stayed in one room. You get on each other's nerves for little stupid things. You learn a lot more about conflict resolution back then, all that type of stuff. You just get really close, and you realize that you've got to rely on each other because you're all that you have. I was very close with my brother, very close with my sister. And like I said, my mom, she was out of pocket quite a bit because she was going to school, getting a degree in thermal electrics, which I didn't even know you could get a degree in that. So she was always really smart, and she was working full time when she graduated. So it was just us on our own. So we were so poor growing up that there was one time where my mom, she didn't have anything to feed us. And she looked in the cupboards, and there was about a week before our government check was coming in. And she had some onions, some oil, and some flour. And so she made onion pie, and we ate onion pie for about 3 days. That's all we ate because that's all we had. And it's just kind of a testament as to the resiliency of a single mother who cares that much about her kids. But yeah, that was our feast for about a week, a little less than a week, was onion pie. So to this day, I always kind of smirk and chuckle a little bit, even to this day when I see onions, because I'm just like, yeah. I can't imagine what that did to our intestinal systems and whatnot, but we survived it. So my brother was pretty much my best friend growing up. He always took me under his wing. All his friends knew who I was. We would hang out whenever he hung out with his friends, and he'd just bring me along for the ride. Well, one day we're coming back from town, and as we're driving by, my brother's laying in the ditch on the side of the road. And so, my mom and my grandma are freaking out, park the car in the driveway. They go running down the driveway. They're down there trying to revive my brother and whatnot, because they didn't know what was wrong with him. And I'm walking down the driveway with my hands in my pockets. My mom knew we were close. And so she was like, Sam, are you okay? And I was like, Mom, if it was his time to go, it was his time to go. Like, there's nothing we can do about it. If he's already gone, he's gone. You just got to accept it. I'm 10 years old, And she was like, who are you, man? Like, really? Turns out what he had done was he was trying to do a backflip on a jump on his bike, and he knocked himself out. So he was laying on the side of the road. The bike was sprawled to the side, so it looked like he got hit by a car. But he had just knocked himself out. But to me, it was just a very matter-of-fact thing. Why would we freak out about something we can't change, right? So I was predisposed. And the whole reason why I even put that in there is because I was kind of predisposed for a very combat type of a mindset, even when I was a kid. I never owned anything when I was a kid, right? Because I was too poor. Somebody had given me some sunflower seeds to plant. And so those were my plants, right? And they had grown up into these big, beautiful sunflowers. And we had this terrible windstorm one day. And I was looking at my sunflowers out there getting the crap kicked out of them by this wind. So I decided that I was going to go out there and hold up these sunflower plants. And I was out there for about 4 hours holding up those plants. And my mom and my brother and sister thought I was absolutely insane. And they were laughing and they were mocking and everything. And I was just hell or high water. Those sunflower plants were going to survive that storm no matter what. So I had this resolve when I was very young that it was like, yeah, I'll stand out here for 4 hours and hold up some sunflower plants. Those are mine. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let them fall, right? So for 4 hours, I'm out there getting whipped in the wind and the rain and everything, making sure my sunflower plants made it. So again, this just kind of goes to my ethics and leadership and whatnot. It's just they weren't going to fall on my watch. It just wasn't going to happen. So my mom never raised us to be victims about anything. You know, I'm mixed black and white. And in northern Michigan, Traverse City, Michigan, a school of 3,000 kids, my sister and myself were the only ones that had any pigment in our skin going to high school. There might have been a couple other ones that transferred in later on, but for the most part, it was just me and my sister. So there were this group of kids that me and my sister affectionately nicknamed the Carhartt Clan. Because they all wore their Carhartt jackets, they had spider web tattoos, and supposedly if there was a spider in the spider web, then they'd done something bad to a black guy, you know, so we're supposed to be afraid of them, and they would mean mug us all the time. So the two that used to come after me all the time, I nicknamed Dinky and Doofus. Now, I weighed 110 pounds maybe in high school. I was this goofy little kid, I had no business mocking people who wanted to come after me and hurt me. So one day, Dinky and Doofus came after me, and they decided they were going to get me in the lunchroom, you know. So my response to this was I stood up on the table in the lunchroom, and the sophomore sat on one side and the senior sat on the other side. So I stood up on the table and I yelled to my sister, I said, "Grace." And she's like, "Sam, just sit down, please. Don't." I'm like, "You hear about this race war that Dinky and Doofus are trying to wage?" And like people kind of start snickering, but it's like dead silent, you know, because we're bringing up race in an all-white town, and it's like the only guy with pigment in his skin is like yelling across the lunchroom. And so she's like, "Sam, just sit down, please sit down." And my friends are kind of like, "Dude, get off the table. What are you doing? What are you doing?" I said, "You know what I think I'm going to do? I think I'm going to go burn a cross in their front yard. I think that's what I'm going to do." And at this point, you could hear a pin drop. You know, people are like, I said, what are you going to, is it a hate crime? You know, what are you going to do? Or better yet, I'm going to go spray paint the N-word on their car, because I can't think of anything worse than a white supremacist that's got to run around town with the N-word spray painted on his car. But I was dropping the N-bomb, right? At this point, I'm getting yanked off the table. I'm getting hauled into the office, you know, and they're like, "You can't talk like that." And I was like, "Look, what do you want me to do? You want me to be a victim? You know, these guys are coming after us because of the color of my skin. They're ignorant. I don't care. You know, this is so stupid of them." So for me, my reaction to it, and that carries through my experience in the Marine Corps and my experience today, when it comes to racial tension and all that type of stuff, I've never considered myself to be like a victim of someone who's got any kind of racial tension or hate towards me because of pigment in my skin. I've always just looked at them like they were ignorant. And it's something that I can't understand today. Because right now, there's a lot of talk about how America is becoming more and more racist, and I just don't see it. And it's not that I'm blind to it. To me, it's like a lower mindset, and it's like, okay, you know, it's like someone who still calls people, you know, derogatory names for Japanese people or for German people or whatever. It's like we all look at them like they're ignorant and stupid, and we don't really care. So why is it different for anything else? You know, it's just kind of a blanket across the board. There's a big disconnect between the narrative that we're presented with versus the reality that we experience, right? So I'm not saying that there aren't racist people out there. Clearly there are. I mean, you can't be ignorant to that fact. But the tolerance for those people is zero. For them to voice anything racist is almost taboo at this point. I mean, it's fun. I will purposely mess with people like that. I ran into a few of them in the Marine Corps, and they just didn't like me because of the color of my skin. And I would, you know, kill them with kindness. You know, I'd be like, so we're gonna be buddies, right? You know, like, "Dude, shut up. You don't want to talk to you." I'm like, "No, man, come on. Let me rub your shoulder." You know, I'd really just mess with them because I knew it made them uncomfortable, and I thought they were being stupid. But again, my mentality is a little bit different, I think. But at the same time, it's just not tolerated. Like, if any one of them at any one point in time was to say, "I don't like you because of the color of your skin," that person would be ostracized immediately and corrected. So I don't buy that there's this institutional racism or that there's a cultural racism that's flaring up anywhere. I don't experience that at all. And maybe it's because of my mentality, but it's never been a problem for me. A friend of mine named Josh Gibbs, he's telling me about this thing called the Crucible. He's like, "You know, we got to go this many miles and we only get so much to eat and all these obstacles we have to overcome." And I was like, "That sounds like fun." He's like, "Well, you know, it's Marine Corps boot camp." And I was like, "Sold, let's go. Let's do it." I was always military mindset to begin with. You know, I would play, I've got on there, I'll play Warhammer, which is a total nerd flex. If you know what Warhammer is, or anybody watching this, if you know what Warhammer is, I would play Warhammer Epic, which is hardcore straight edge Warhammer, not Warhammer 40K. And I would paintball. That's how I spent my time, besides playing music. That was it. So for me, the idea, the challenge was a big deal. I wanted that. The adventure. You know, I was really worried that I was going to live a life that I didn't have any fun stories to tell, or I was going to be boring or anything like that. If I knew what I was getting into or what was in store for me, I never would have worried about it. I have a very storied life. But this idea of going without and suffering, you know, with a bunch of other guys and accomplishing this seemingly impossible task really appealed to me. So I walked into my recruiter's office and was like, yeah, I want to be an infantry guy. And he was like, well, your ASVAB score says you can do all these other things, and you're a musician, and you're pretty good, so we could do a lot. I'm like, nah, just give me a gun, tell me where to go, and let's go make that happen. So you can imagine what it was like for the recruiter to see this scrawny little kid with a huge nose and a weird haircut come walking into his office and says he wants to be a grunt. I was a borderline beatnik when I joined the Marine Corps. Like, I was just like, dude, whatever, man, everything's groovy, don't worry about it. And I have Marine Corps Infantry, like, in 1999, where he still beat people for getting promoted. So it was definitely a culture shock, but that's really why I joined, is because I knew the world was going to roll right over the top of me. You know, I didn't take anything seriously, and I loved the idea of the challenge. Boot camp was a culture shock. So again, coming from a very tight-knit and poor family, we were very polite. My mother was extremely adamant that we were eloquent in how we presented ourselves. And we never said things like ain't or ma or anything like that. Like, we were very well poised and well spoken children. And we were always very polite with each other. So that's the environment I came from. Yeah, you contrast that with boot camp. You know, the first time I get on a plane, by the way, is on my way to boot camp. So there's that experience. Get off the plane. I'm at the USO in San Diego. You know, anybody who's gone through boot camp in San Diego probably knows what I'm talking about if you flew in. You know, we're all a little nervous. We get on the bus, and then there's that famous culture shock, you know, where the drill instructor gets on the bus and gives you his speech and says, "Get off my bus." And I remember shaking. I was so nervous, I was shaking. And that takes a lot for me to do. Not a lot gets me nervous. Like, house fire, not a big deal. My brother dying, not a big deal. Drill instructor, big freaking deal. I was freaking out. And I remember getting thrown off the bus. You know, you're walking down the steps, they're pretty steep, and somebody like from the top of the steps threw me, and then somebody at the bottom of the steps caught me and threw me because we weren't getting off the bus fast enough. So they were just flinging us off the bus. And then we're standing there, we're reading the UCMJ and all that kind of stuff, learning how to drop our bags and move as a unit. We go through our little declaration of, you know, if we got any contraband or any of that kind of stuff. And I'm just in shock. I remember, like, it felt like things were hitting me and I couldn't feel it because I just was trying to process so much that was happening. And it wasn't long till we were in the med line, and I was so nervous I actually wound up throwing up in the med line. So then I was known as that kid, you know, which is not a reputation you want, but the one that threw up in the med line. And I remember finally when actually, you know what, I'm gonna back up, because there's a through line here in my entire military experience, and that is when you're sleeping on the bus. The bus is moving and you're sleeping on the bus, and you feel the bus slow down and stop. And there is a certain dread that I would experience, knowing that that door was about to open and just all hell was gonna break loose when it happened. You know, whatever reality was waiting at our destination was now gonna become real. I was gonna have to deal with it. And I remember that was the first time I experienced it, when we hit the front gate at MCRG San Diego. And I experienced it several other times through even my deployments, all of that. There's this very specific moment in time where whatever transportation we were on, when it stopped, now it was gonna get real. We had one kid try to bolt. He tried to take off, you know, because San Diego, you've got the airport right there. Recruit Pelham decided he had it. And he had made a mistake, and it was time for him to correct that mistake. So he took off one time. We were on the second deck of our squad bay, of our building. And he took off, and he made it about halfway across the PT field. But we were like all in the window, and we were like kind of cheering him on, like he might make it, you know, because he had a real good start on the drill instructors. And I remember, the thing I remember the most about it is seeing the drill instructor behind him. You know, he's running in core frames, and he's got his smoky on, and his smoky was like not bobbing up and down. It was like perfectly smooth. I don't know how he pulled that off, but if you can imagine, like when people run, they bob up and down, right? Perfectly smooth, and like a freaking panther just running after this kid. And we're all like, he's gonna make it, he's gonna make it. About 5 seconds later, we're like, he ain't gonna make it. And sure enough, cloud of dust, boom, kid gets tackled. We had to refer to him as the criminal from that point forward. And we got back from morning chow because we were PTing and he was in his PT gear still. So during our shower time is when he tried to take off. But we come back from morning chow and he's sitting Indian style and he's kind of got this like Zen look on his face and his hands are like this and he's sitting in the middle of the squad bay. And they were like, you refer to him as the freaking criminal from now on, good to go. And we were like, well, that didn't work out too well. He had a little scuff on his face when he got tackled. It was bad. But that was sort of that signal of you're in this for good now. So just accept the pain, you know. It's a little scary, but accept the pain. It took him like 3 days to do it. But he just sort of disappeared. You know how that works, where like, you know, he's there one day and then he's just not. And nobody knows what happened and you're not allowed to ask questions. So I'm a pretty smiley guy, right? I'm a pretty well-mannered, jolly kind of guy. But I also smile or giggle when I get uncomfortable about things. So for me, the worst time I got everybody in trouble because I was smiling and laughing was we were all getting smoked for something. I can't remember what it was, but we were in the push-up position. I mean, I was hurting, but I'm looking around and everybody has like these twisted, weird expressions on their faces and they all sound like they're trying to take a massive dump. This is what I remember going through my head. And I kind of started giggling because I couldn't like keep my face straight. And as I started giggling, like somebody else started giggling and I couldn't look at them. And sure enough, like in half a second, there's the drill instructor standing right in front of me. He's like, oh, you think it's funny? It was like, uh-oh. And from that point forward, I was known as the giggly one. And every time we'd get smoked, they would single me out and be like, until he stops laughing, everybody keeps going. I was like, crap. So they were all paying for my jolly manner. The last thing I was going to say is there was this little ritual that our senior drill instructor had us do where he took the platoon guide on. He was from the Bronx, so he kind of had that pour out a little liquor, gangster kind of mentality about things. And he had us take our canteens, and we would pour it on the platoon guidon, and we would say what the Marine Corps meant to us at that point. And I remember when I poured my canteen on it, I said, this is my new family. I had no idea how much I meant that at the time. I was very naive when I was younger, joining the Marine Corps and whatnot. But that played out later on as to be exactly what it was. So I did want to mention that because that will come into play later on too. So when you're standing on top of the Reaper, I remember I counted every step up the Reaper. It was 2,300 steps up the Reaper. And that's how I kept my mind off the pain, was I was just focused on putting one foot in front of the other one. And in a true testament to Marine Corps style, later on, of course, we would run up and down the Reaper 100 times. It wasn't a big deal, but in boot camp, that was the big test, right? But standing on top of that Reaper and getting the Eagle Globe and Anchor and being referred to as a Marine for the first time, for me, it was very ceremonial, but it wasn't like this earth-shattering event for me, because I was still in shock. You know, I had never really accomplished anything in my life before, so I didn't have this kind of eye-opening experience and this, you know, this revelation at the top of the mountain. It wasn't like that for me at all. It was, okay, it's time to get to business now. It's time to get to work. You know, later on, I would realize that, you know, graduating boot camp is like, it's a big deal at the time. Pretty much nothing compared to what I would experience later on. That was a very, very small accomplishment in comparison to what the Marine Corps had in store for me. But even then, it was just, you know, I was in that mental shock, you know, where I could take anything. I could take the pain, I could take the abuse, I could take whatever frustrations or pain that came up. It didn't matter. So when I got my EGA, I was still in that mindset where I was just kind of like, okay, good, now we get back to work, right? You know, like, what's next? I go home on leave, right, after boot camp. I come back to Camp Pendleton. So we land at the airport, we get on the bus, and we're coming into SOI. I remember I'm asleep on the bus, and it's the same thing plays out where, okay, we're at the gate. I'm still kind of trying to stay asleep, but I feel a stop at the gate. Okay, we're on base. I have no idea how long it's going to take. So I'm like hoping I can just get a little bit more rest in before like the reality hits. And sure enough, the bus comes to a stop. Here we go. Everybody off the bus. All right, so we're checking in. We're going through our stuff. Everybody's like all messed up because your alphas were in your sea bag and they're all wrinkled up now or whatever. So people are getting sniped out of line like right and left and getting the crap kicked out of them or getting thrown down in some kind of push-up position, or they don't have their paperwork right or whatever. So it's a really stressful environment for the pickup. So we make it through all of that. And some people were dumb enough to bring a lot of stuff with them. I was fortunate that I didn't have anything. So all I had was my stuff from boot camp and my uniforms and my orders. So I was pretty agile, but they ran us from our receiving to the barracks that we were going to, which is about 1,000 meters. And when they ran us, I mean, people were dropping stuff right and left. I mean, it was this shit show. And so when we finally got there, we're all drenched with sweat. We're all nervous. We're all shaking and everything. We're sitting on our packs and our sea bags on the grinder in front of the barracks. And this guy comes walking out, and he's just sitting there scowling at us. He just looks mean as hell, and you can tell he just hates us. And he's got this can of Copenhagen, and most people will take a pinch with like 2 fingers. Copenhagen, and he's just looking at us, and he sticks it in his lip, and it's like half a can of Copenhagen in his lip. And he's sitting there, he's just looking at us for a good 5 minutes, which is awkward as hell. He just spits, and he's looking at us, and he goes, "I'm gonna tell y'all motherfuckers right now, I am the most straight up motherfucker you're ever gonna meet. It is my job to break you. So if you get my stamp of approval, that means you're ready for the fleet. But if I can break you, that means I'm gonna save somebody else the trouble." He just told us straight out. So he's like, "Which one of motherfuckers can write?" And everybody was just terrified. They're like, And he looks right at me, and he's like, "You don't look like a moron. Come here." So I get up, I walk over there. He's like, "You're my scribe. So where's your writing gear?" And I'm like, "Sergeant, I don't know about." He's like, "Well, go fucking find it." And I'm like, smoke trails. I'm running around. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just moving. Get my writing gear. I'm ready. And he's like, "All right, take these names down." He reads off the names for the people that were in his squad. And I was praying to God I was not in his squad. Oh no, I was in his squad. So I was like, awesome. I get to be this guy. He probably knew who I was to begin with anyway. That's why he picked me out. But so Sergeant Smith had us so scared of him that any gesture he made, we would respond to. What I mean by that is his sister had actually drowned while we were in class, in session. And he went home for her funeral. When he came back, he saw us and he waved to us. He puts his hand up like this. And when his hand dropped, we all hit the ground. That's how scared we were of this dude. Okay? Routinely, he would tell us to gear up, and he was going to take us to a place where they couldn't hear us scream. And he would just smoke check us for hours on end. He was so brutal about the way he did things. And I remember I fell asleep behind my weapon one time, and he walked up and he kicked me in the face. And this is something that a lot of people would hear, and they think that's brutal, that's terrible, that's unacceptable. But what he did right after that, and I still remember, the smell of Copenhagen on his breath when he was like this close to me, and he's like, "Imagine if that was a bullet. Imagine if I really wanted to hurt you. Don't you ever fall asleep behind your weapon." Lesson learned, and it took, 10 seconds, right? To teach someone that lesson today in the Marine Corps, you've probably got a good 6 or 7 times that they're going to screw it up before they really get the idea. And they still probably wouldn't understand it. Quite like a boot to the face, followed up by some words of wisdom being whispered in your ear at 3 o'clock in the morning. He went home on leave for the funeral, and he came right back. But this was back in 99. And the combat instructors back in 99 were a different breed. Every one of them had a record of some sort, a criminal record. They would joke routinely about how many STDs they had. And they were not known as a B billet back then, or a secondary MOS, or whatever they called it now, where it's really kind of prestigious, where you're selected, screened and selected. I eventually became a combat instructor, actually at that same company. And it was a lot more prestigious when I became one. But back then, it was sort of the dumping ground for the salty sergeant that they didn't know what to do with. And they were like, "Okay, well, go to SOI and finish out your tour." So these guys were tough as nails. And it's no surprise to me at all that his sister died. And he was like, "Roger that. Rest in peace. Okay, back to work." He was that kind of a guy. So yeah, I don't think he mourned at all. It was a different Marine Corps, and I didn't understand it then. I understand it a lot better now. And I think we've lost a lot in getting rid of that culture. It was brutal, don't get me wrong, but we were fighters. We were warriors, man. A guy like me never been in a fight in his life before I joined. And then, being made to fight my instructors, where they're like, "Okay, we're doing checkpoint operations. Fight me." And I'm like, like this? Like, what do I do here, you know? But you get your butt kicked so many times and you learn you're not made out of glass and then you can survive within the fight. That is such an important thing for a warrior to understand. It's lost today. It is lost. My first battalion was 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marines. So I was Warlord. I was 2-2, which you're familiar with. At the airport, again, we weren't wearing our alphas because we graduated in our Charlies. But then for the flight, we all switched over to our civilian attire. And then when we got there, our platoon sergeant was expecting everybody in their alphas. Sergeant Vince was our platoon sergeant. And he was a Somali war veteran. So he had been, at that point in time, one of the very few people that had actually seen combat. Because at that point, like, nobody had really seen combat. All the guys that were in the Gulf War had pretty much processed out at that point. Sergeant Vince was this, I mean, just picture like Joe Pesci in Goodfellas. Like, that's his demeanor, right? The slightest thing would piss him off, and he would just go through the roof over anything. So here come a bunch of the new guys, which he's obviously like being punished because he had to come get us from the Raleigh airport. Right? So he's mad about the fact he's there in the first place. And now he's got to deal with all the boots and all the new guys and everything. The whole battalion is at the rifle range. So he had been pulled off of that detail to go get us, basically, and get the boot drop. Half of us are in our uniforms. Half of us, again, it's the same deal where we just stuffed our alphas in our garment bag and it's been folded over and crunched and everything. So all of our uniforms are jacked up. So he's like surprise uniform inspection right there in the terminal of the Raleigh airport. And he's like ripping us to shreds. And I will never forget, this poor kid came walking up, had blue hair, and he's just like, hey man, like, you need to chill out, to Sergeant Vince. And Sergeant Vince, he just sat there shaking. And I could see him like murdering this kid in his imagination in 100 different ways. And he's just going, get away from me. And this kid's like, I'm just saying, man, you're not a big man, you're not tough, you're not, and he was like, remove yourself now. And we were like, this is our platoon sergeant. Awesome. Okay, this is going to go real well. After he lifed that kid, is our expression for like sucking the life out of somebody's face. He ripped him a new one, up one side, down the other, lost his mind, caused a huge scene. The kid takes off because he's freaking scared. He's like, get on the bus before I get arrested. Let's now. So we get on the bus. And again, I'm dreading this, because this is my first impression of the Fleet Marine Force. Drill instructors are drill instructors. Combat instructors are combat instructors. Now you're at the fleet, you've made it, right? No. We get on the bus. We got like a 2-hour ride back or something like that. Again, I'm asleep on the bus. And I'm just dreading when I feel that bus stop. Because if this is our platoon sergeant, I can only imagine what our squad leaders are going to be like. But like, I'm picturing like orcs, like we're going to get there. It's going to be some fantasy, just god-awful mayhem as soon as we get off the bus, because that's been my experience so far. I feel the bus come to a stop and I pick my head up and I'm like, all right, it's going to take a certain amount of courage. Let's get this done. So get off the bus and we're all in our alphas at this point. He starts marching us around the quad like a drill instructor in circles, making us sing the isms from boot camp, basically. Essentially announcing to the entire battalion that the boot drop was here. So people are coming out and doing what we used to call manning the rails, right? They man the rails where everybody's out on their catwalks. And if you can imagine everybody that was there, they were all people who were like TAD or they were coming back from a school or whatever, because the whole battalion was at the rifle range. So they knew there was no oversight. There's no officers or senior enlisted there to protect us. So it was a bloodbath is the best way to describe that. They came down because we had our sea bags with us, and while we're marching around, they're ripping our sea bags off, they're cutting our sea bags open, they're hauling them up to the third deck and flinging our stuff all over the place, all over the quad. They're pulling people out of formation and like making us do push-ups and hazing us right then and there. I mean, there was no defense mechanism. There was nothing that could prepare you for it. It was just like a feeding frenzy, a bunch of piranhas, They just kept attacking and kept attacking and kept attacking. And I didn't know how to take that. Again, I came from an environment that was very respectable and very calm and very nice, So for them to be treating us that way, I just didn't have any tools to like understand what was happening. You get treated like a recruit in boot camp, you get treated like an animal at SOI, and now you're like a barely tolerated pet, like the dog that the dad didn't want, right? You're that thing that's annoying the crap out of them. Getting to the unit was a very traumatizing experience for us. And we were there for a whole week of just kind of getting mildly messed with. And I thought it was bad until the unit got back from the rifle range. And when they got back from the rifle range, it's a Friday. As soon as they get back, the beers are coming out and they're like, okay, the fresh meat's here. It's my turn. And they're rolling up their sleeves and kind of licking their lips and sharpening their knives. We just had no idea what was coming. And they would storm our rooms. They were pouring beer all over us. I was a goody two-shoes little Christian kid. So I'm like not drinking, and I'm like, no, I refuse to drink. So now I'm too good to drink with them, so they would punch you in the gut and pour another beer on you and punch you in the gut and pour another beer on you and throw you across the room on your rack and then wrap you up in the sheets and like drag you across the thing, I mean, and it was like to them good fun, right? To me, again, I wasn't really a warrior yet. So to me, I didn't understand what was happening. This was so traumatizing. I was terrified and angry. And to give you an idea how naive I was, I didn't actually write this in the outline thing, but I thought we were going to live in the field. I thought infantry guys just lived in the field. When I saw the barracks, growing up as poor as I did, it looked like a hotel to me. And I was like, that's where we stay? And they're like, yeah, that shit box is called a barracks and it should be condemned. It's full of mold and cockroaches. And I was like, that's like a Holiday Inn to me. Like, really? That's where we stay. And they're like, just wait till you see your room. And then I got up there and I was like, this is great. And they're like, yeah, get on your face. They'll show you how great it is. So, I mean, I was so naive and so altruistic when I joined that I just had no idea what was going to happen to me, right? Back to getting drug around and beat on and everything poured on you and all that kind of stuff. I really grew to despise my senior Marines. I mean, I really hated them with the fire of 1,000 suns. I'd never felt like that towards anybody ever in my life. And I remember I used to go buy a box of Nutty Bars from the PX, and I would sit on Camp Lejeune. There's the base theater, and there's this big old oak tree that grows next to the base theater. And I would sit in that oak tree and eat Nutty Bars and just try to process what I was going through. And I remember there was a point in time where I decided I wasn't going to smile anymore. I wasn't going to talk anymore. I was only going to do what I was told. I never went out in town. Like the first 2 years I was in the Marine Corps, I didn't know what Jacksonville, North Carolina looked like because I never left. All I did was study and press my uniforms and PT and all my off time was just completely dedicated to being the best Marine I could be because I thought that if I was better than my senior Marines, then they couldn't treat me that way anymore, right? So it was all for the wrong reasons. But because of that, my nickname became Knowledge. That's when I really started to kind of blossom as a warrior, again, for all the wrong reasons. Because I knew more than my team leaders did, and I wanted to know more than my squad leaders did. So in a lot of ways, I had big attitude problems because they would be like, we're going to go do this. And I'd be like, that's incorrect. You need to be on the military crest, not down here. I don't care if we're on line here. Our fire is deconflicted and we need to be up there. Okay. Private First Class Williams is telling Corporal so-and-so he's wrong. Didn't go well at all. So I was really struggling at the beginning. And it came to a head where they had, because I was also forgetful because I was so stressed out. So I had to carry around, at one point in time, I had a pet rock named Howie. I had a dime because I dimed one of them out one time and they were like, so now you got to carry a dime around with you. I had Vaseline because my squad leader told me, so that's so when he fucks me, it doesn't hurt as bad. There was a sock that I had to carry everything in, and my ID card had to be in my sock at all times. Those 5 things I had to have on me at any given time because I kept forgetting things or messing up. So I just had this little basket of crap that I had to carry around with me all the time as their way of singling me out and making sure that I was, they're trying to put me in my place. I didn't understand it back then because, I'm smart and I know better. So when it came to its worst, all of us junior Marines decided that we were gonna go kill the senior Marines. We're gonna run down to their room because it was a field day. And if you're a junior Marine, you understand what field day is. It's Thursday night, and all the seniors are drinking, so they can inspect your rooms and fuck with you. That's what it is, right? And we used to do. It was funny because I first heard the term Chinese field day many years later, but to us, field day was all your furniture comes out of your room. Everything gets wiped down from the ceiling to the floor. Everything gets cleaned and then replaced back into the room. That was field day for us. That's how we were taught. I mean, you can imagine they would be in there and pulling dust out of a screw hole or something like that. And like, oh, you failed, start over, you know, and they're drunk. And so we were like, we've had it, we're done. We're going to go down there, we're just going to beat them all to death. So we all went storming down there. I don't know if everybody had like the kind of hatred I had for them. They were probably just going to go fight them. But to me, like, I wanted blood. But I had no idea how to fight. No, and to them, it was funny. I wound up pinned across one of those little mini refrigerators with, I remember it was Beaver. Corporal Beaver had his thumb like right here on my throat, and he was laughing. And I was so angry because I'm like giving it everything I've got. And it was like, it wasn't even registering to him. You know, he was so used to that kind of lifestyle. And he was like, you know, I'd hit him or I'd slap him and he'd just be like, just knock it off, dude. And he's fighting like somebody else over here and just keeping me pinned there with his arm. I mean, if you've ever seen Guardians of the Galaxy where Drax is fighting that one monster and he's just like going to town with the knives and the monster's like not even like noticing, that's what I felt like. It was just zero effect whatsoever. And that, at that point in time was when I realized, okay, I'm going to need to rework how I think here. Like, this is not correct. You know, I've got to do something different. I started asking myself the harder questions, you know, like, what is the purpose of all this stuff? Why are they beating on us so much and all this type of stuff? And I started to realize that they were just trying to teach us that we weren't made of glass, you know? And the term that I heard was called stress inoculation. And I haven't heard it since then. Which is another thing I think we've lost. And that was that they were purposely stressing us out and putting us through the paces because we needed to understand how to be tough. If you are nothing else as a Marine Corps infantryman, you have to be tough. If you're tough and smart, that's even better. You can't be weak. You know, if you get hurt and you just bitch up right then and there, you are not the Marine Corps brand, especially back in the late 90s. Not going to happen. So they were teaching us, like, you can take a beating and you can have a beer with the guy who beat you. Don't take it personal. This is us training you to be a warrior. So I really was forged and took on that warrior persona and that mentality back in 2-2 by those guys. And I'm eternally grateful for them for doing that. Now, back then, if I talked to them, I'd be like, yeah, sure, I might piss next to you if you were on fire, just so you know that my own piss might be the thing that relieves you, but I wouldn't even give you that satisfaction. I hated them that much. Again, it's just because I didn't understand it. I was coming from a civilian mindset, you know, where we're polite and we respect each other. Or the warrior, it's, no, we're going to beat on you and you're going to prove that you're worth it. And if you're worth our time, then you've gone through that rite of passage. And now you're one of us and we'll die for you. You know, we'll give you everything once you've gone through that rite of passage, but you've got to prove it first. And we're going to test the shit out of you for it. You know, and the harder the test, the more valuable the right is. And I didn't understand that then. So it was during my first deployment, because, you know, I was attitude problems. So I was on combat cargo, right? Because that's what happens is, you know, anytime they need people to go on ship's platoon, they take the problem children and they kick them out to the supporting elements. So I was on combat cargo. I will never forget Sergeant McCartney. We were in Split, Croatia. And Sergeant McCartney was talking to one of my friends, Jason Carmen, was an older guy. Still a private first class, but he joined when he was like 28. And he was like my right-hand dude while we were in. And I overheard him talking. He didn't know I was there because he would never admit this to my face. Like, he was professional enough that he was never going to tell me this to my face. He's drunk and he's kind of doing this like, yep, kind of nod thing, you know, because I could tell he's deep in his head. And he goes, Williams, goes, that dude has potential. I would do anything for that kid. He just doesn't get it. And I chewed on that for a long time because I thought he just hated me. You know, I mean, this is the same guy that we're on an exercise 3 days before this. We're on exercise. You know, I was smart and I was fast and agile and I was a rifleman, so he had me out on the flank. So as I'm out on the flank, I'm on the military crest like I should be. We get done with it and he pulls me in and he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, military crest, Sergeant? Like, what do you mean? And he's like, okay, so if somebody pops up on the other side of that hill, we get outflanked, we don't even freaking know. Push your ass to the other side of the hill and make sure that we're good. And I was like, okay, it's not doctrine, but okay, got it. So we recock and we run it again. So this time I push on the other side of the hill. He pulls, what are you doing? You know, I'm like, what you told me to. I'm on the other side of the hill. He's like, you know what the military crest is. You're supposed to be on this side of the hill. And I just couldn't make the guy happy, no matter what. Later on, it dawned on me. He was trying to teach me two different things. One, I just need to think. Okay, not simply react to what's going on. I need to think my way through my situations. And I need to stand up for myself. Not disrespectfully, but I need to figure out how to navigate that terrain on my own. because in a combat type of situation, he needs to depend on me and know that I can make those proper decisions and communicate with him correctly. He was trying to teach me and train me properly. His methodology was foreign to me, so I didn't understand what he was trying to teach me. Later on, 3 days later, here he is talking about how I just don't get it, but he'd die for me. He'd give me the shirt off his back, whatever I needed, which later on he proved when we were on a mission, just a training mission, but I forgot to pack my poncho liner. And it was getting cold at night, and it had rained a little bit, so I was wet. He wound up giving me his poncho liner because it was well past, okay, it's time for you to learn a lesson. I was about to go hypothermic. He could see that. So he gave up his equipment so then I could not basically die that night, right? And he suffered for it. And it was never something that was a second thought to him. It wasn't ever brought up again. It wasn't, you're an idiot, none of that. I remember he looked at what I brought and he was like, that's what you're bringing? Yeah, he goes, okay. He knew right then. Never said anything to me about it. He just let me realize what could have happened and then let me see him suffer to make sure I was taken care of. Lesson learned. Nothing ever had to be said again. So I gained a lot of respect for him. So that's when things kind of started to dawn on me. But it didn't actually click until 2 events happened later on. Sergeant McCartney got out of the Marine Corps. 6 months after he got out, he wrote me a letter, which blew my mind. I'm like, why is this guy thinking of me when he's out of the Marine Corps? Like, he's graduated, he's done. Because that's kind of how we looked at it back then, The guys would throw their boots over the power lines, and burn their uniforms when they got out at that point in time. So for him to be out and to write me a letter really blew my mind. But in that letter, he detailed everything I was doing wrong. He's like, Williams, you think too much. Just slam your balls against the wall, let it hurt, learn something, but stop overanalyzing everything and just do. I was like, how's this guy know what I'm doing wrong this many years later or this many months later? I'd cross-decked to 1-8 at this point. I wasn't even in the unit anymore. From him saying, he would give me the shirt off his back and he would die for me, to that letter, to about a year after that, I got a call from another one of the guys, Lance Corporal Reed. Reed was hilarious. He's a Jamaican guy who was raised in London, and he just did not fit the Marine Corps mold. Every time he was promoted, it was meritorious. Shortly thereafter, he was demoted. It's just how he was about everything. Ran a 12-mile ruck run with a cigar in his mouth, passes the battalion commander and pulls it out, and his way of greeting him was to, sir? He just kind of kept running with the cigar in his mouth. Crazy guy. Hilarious, though. But he calls me. Hey, Sam, I just want to let you know, after everything we did to you, did we ever leave you behind? And I had to think about it. I'm like, no, you never did. He goes, okay. Do you think we would have left you behind? I said, no, I don't think you would. He goes, so you get it, right? Yeah, I get it now. He goes, okay. And he hung the phone up, and that was the last thing he ever said to me. At that point, that was the torch being passed, where that was the final nail in the coffin, where it's like, fuck how anybody feels. Fuck your emotions. Fuck all of that. The only thing that matters is getting your guys home. So whatever you got to do to make them smart enough, lethal enough, whatever, to last the day so they can come home, that's all that matters. And that's where I was really galvanized. Like, that conversation right there, where I was like, yeah, you sacrifice everything to make this work. The first deployment was with 2-2. The first 2 deployments actually were pre-war. They're pre-9/11. So the Marine Corps was a much different environment back then. And a lot of guys these days don't really know what that was, because the guys that are our age, they're all aged out now, right? So that's back when we still fought, we were training to fight communism, right? Like, we had Crazy Ivan targets with the big red star on their heads, and that's what we would shoot at still, right? We weren't tooled up for the war on terror. So we were booze cruising. Like, when we go to the Mediterranean, it was Liberty Port after Liberty Port after Liberty Port. So here you got super poor, super naive Sam Williams, who lands in Almeria, Spain. They drop the brow on the ship. It's the south coast of Spain in July, right? So it's like perfect. It's beautiful. I don't speak the language. I have no idea how to operate in a foreign country. I'd never been off my farm until I went to boot camp, right? So they drop the brow and they're like, everybody get off the ship. And I'm like, no, I'm good. I never went out on Livo, right? If you remember, like, I just stayed in my room and studied all the time. They're like, everybody get off the ship. I'm like, no, I'm good. And they're like, no, we have to clean the berthing area. Everybody off. So I walked down and I set foot in Spain. And I'm standing there on the pier and I'm like, I'm in a foreign country. I'm in Spain. What do I do in Spain? Like, I don't even know where to get started here. So I literally sat there for a good 15 or 20 minutes and I'm like, Well, I guess like you could smoke Cuban cigars in Spain and you can't smoke those in the United States. So let me do something here that you can't do in the States. So, I knew enough Spanish. So I was like, well, I pretty much failed it in high school, but I took 2 semesters of it so I could speak a little bit. I asked somebody, where's the tabacaria, right? And they're like, oh, you go down here and da-da-da-da-da. So I go down to the tobacco shop and I'm looking and there's Montecristos up there. And I was like, it's the only cigar I knew of because I'd seen it in a movie one time, So I was like, I'll take a Montecristo. So I've got this Montecristo. I'm sitting there, I'm drinking orange Fanta in this little outdoor market, and I see a bunch of my senior Marines coming. Here we go, they're gonna start messing with me again. So I just kind of tried not to make eye contact, but as they get closer, they're already drunk, and they're just like, Williams, get over here, Williams. And I stood up and I looked at them and I sat right back down. Because this was the first cigar I'd ever smoked, so I had no idea what effect it was gonna have on me, right? And I let my head drop back and I kind of started giggling. And they were like, Williams, you fucked up? And I was like, no, Corporal, I'm not fucked up. And I kind of like rolled my head over to the side and looked at him and he was like, Williams is fucked up. Come on, man, let's go. And I didn't know how to take it because they're like having fun with me now, right? So I'm like mildly annoyed and kind of like edgy and agitated and still really like, So there's the guy who I had asked about the tobacco shop was a doorman at a discotheque that was kind of like 2 or 3 doors down from where I was sitting. And he had kicked them out earlier. We're walking and they're like, there's that guy who won't let us in, blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, it's Javier. I know Javier, And they're like, oh, really? So I go down there and I'm like, hey, my guys are idiots, but they want to come back in. Is it okay? He's like, if they're with you, they could come in, So I felt special. I know you're just messing around. Because I got them back through the door, then I was like, I was the man now, right? And so I just had this actually kind of an amazing night there. Dancing with all these different women and just having a good time. And, the senior Marines are now looking at me like I'm not a complete bag of shit for the first time ever, but there's a lot of mixed emotions. I had no idea what to think, right? This is night 1 in Spain for a kid who's never been off the farm, right? So I'm like in heaven. I've never experienced anything like this. And I'm discovering that I'm actually kind of good at life when it comes to these different types of experiences and adapting to these things. If you had held a camera up before that deployment to take my pictures, I would have been shy and I would have like looked away and I wouldn't even known like what to do or how to act. By the time I got home from that deployment, I was like, I have arrived. World Sam Williams is here and he's here to stay. It's going to be a party. So I really blossomed on that first deployment. And I think because of the fact that it was a booze cruise, it gave me that latitude to be able to have fun and start realizing that there's things out there that this world has to offer that are a lot of fun. And if you're willing to step out of your farm, expand your mind a little bit, then maybe you'll have a lot of fun. So I really appreciated the fact that I got the experiences of being out there in the Mediterranean and getting to party with different cultures, and you wind up in a club, 5,000 people in it all screaming and jumping up and down, they dump foam on everybody, and everyone's on some weird drug that you don't know about, and it's just like, what is happening right now? You can imagine, I felt like, the opening scene of Blade, he's like walking through and everyone's like feeling on him. That's what it was like walking through the club. And I was just like, my mind was blown just day after day after day. It was such a great time in the Mediterranean before the War on Terror broke out. First time I ever saw all my senior Marines smile was when we were on the bus leaving CAX. And it's because the song from Clarence Carter's Strokin' came on and they all just kind of started smiling, like looking at each other and nodding. Reason why I later found out was because they were in Panama and the officers club, I guess, was right across the street from their barracks. All the officers were out on maneuvers. They went across the street, were dancing and hooking up with other wives. So the MPs were called. The MPs came up. They captured one of the MPs. They took his paintball gun and his OC spray. And the other MPs were trying to get up the ladder well to get to him. And they were like fighting him off with it. And they just thought it was funny. Like it was just, this is their mentality, right? These guys are just, like I said, they're like orcs. They're just savages about everything. But the reason why they were smiling and nodding is because that was the song they were dancing to when they all got busted, Strokin' by Clarence Carter. But that was the first time I ever saw all my senior Marines at one time smile, was when that song came on. And it was, of course, in remembrance of them violating God knows how many things, right? And taking MPs hostage in Panama. So same guys, 2 of them started, we were in Sicily, I think, and they went to the red light district. And they started at the top of the block and they just hit every whorehouse on the way. Every single one, until they got about halfway down and the whores were turning them away because they were like, if you went into that house, you're not coming into this house. And they were like, no, because it's that cadence. No, fuck 98 till his balls turned blue, he backed off, jacked off, and fucked the other 2. Have you ever heard that one? All right, so they were trying to live that cadence out is what their goal was. They later told me. Eventually, they wind up back at the ship, and one of them's got crabs. Now, if you can imagine when you're living in that tight quarters, we're in a garage that's what, 20 by 20, right? Maybe 40 Marines in here, right? Like we'd put a whole platoon in this kind of thing. So when somebody's got crabs, it's a freaking problem and it's going to spread like wildfire, right? So they're telling him to get rid of it, tell him to take care of it. You know, he's not going to take care of it. He's kind of taking his time doing it. So the senior Marines told us junior Marines to scrub him down. We took like one of those 5-gallon buckets of ice cream that they have on the mess deck, put it over his head so his arms were pinned down, threw him in the shower, and then we took scuzz brushes and bleached this dude. Scrubbed him down. Needless to say, the crabs were gone. He had raw marks all over him, and he was swearing our death the entire freaking time. Goes to show you, take care of yourself or we'll take care of it for you. You know, it's that warrior culture thing. So while we were at CAX, we were range 400. Okay, and again, you know, trying to describe how traumatizing these experiences are to someone who hasn't been there. For those who have run range 400, you're going to know what I'm talking about. Where it's the only thing you hear about when you're at CAX is range 400, range 400. How many heat casualties you're going to take on range 400. The attrition rate is ridiculous on range 400. We're at the bottom of the hill. They throw the Bangalore out there. They blow the line charge. And we start the assault. And it's like 1,500 meters up to the trench line, right? So the machine gunners are running up on our right. We're going through the trench. And it starts off and you're still lucid. You still understand what's happening, right? But right around 750 meters, you sort of transcend into this spiritual being and your body no longer feels anything except pain. And so I remember when we got up there to our assault position, we're about to, because you're running through a big gully running up, and then you have to go over this hill and drop down into a trench line. And so the machine gunners are suppressing the trench line, and they have to walk the rounds in front of you as you're clearing the trench line. So they're trying to keep the fire as close as they can to you without actually killing you, right? So the front guy has a flag. The scene that unfolds when we drop into that trench line is nothing short of mayhem. Most of us had been strung out because we started off together, right? But over 1,500 meters of running, we get really spread out. So when the time came for us to actually assault, the whole platoon wasn't even there yet. But I remember it was me and my buddy Wilkinson and a couple other people. We drop into that trench line. Wilkinson had just put like 400 rounds through his saw. So when he sets it down, jumps down the trench line, reaches up, I remember hearing his hand sizzle when he grabbed the barrel. So like from my perspective, I'm down the trench line, I'm delirious. Like I can't tell which way's up really because I'm overheating like crazy. I hear that sizzle and I look over and he's on the ground looking at his hand. He's just like, oh my God, with this terrified look on his face. I feel someone land on top of me and kind of push me over. So I'm kind of like sprawled out and I'm getting up. And as I'm getting pushed forward, there's this outlet in the trench line to my left. Now, keep in mind, we were briefed there's supposed to be somebody with a flag in front of you so the machine gunners know where to shoot. There is no flag in front of me. I was the first one getting pushed. And so I get handed a grenade. Okay, Private Williams gets handed a grenade. The only other time Private Williams has thrown a grenade was in SOI. And he threw 2 practice ones and 1 live one. They're like hitting the back of my helmet and I can't really hear what's going on because again, my vision's kind of going like this. And I was like, okay, right, thumb clip, pull the pin. And I know that when you throw the grenade, you're not supposed to throw it straight in. You're supposed to throw it so it spirals, right? So you throw it down like that. Well, there's these 4x4 posts on the inside of the trench line. And that grenade bounced right off of that and rolled right back out. So I get yanked back, somebody else gets yanked back, and I remember the concussion hitting me. I didn't get any fragmentation. I don't know how, I don't know why, but I remember the concussion hitting me, and I felt someone pick me up by my body armor and just push me forward. My hearing was gone. And the sound that an M16 makes when you've been blown up and you just like, you don't know which way's up. I didn't know which way was up to begin with, but now I've been blown up. I can't hear anything. I can't feel anything. I'm completely disoriented. And I remember they kept telling me to shoot. So I'm getting pushed forward and I just remember hearing pack, 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 pack. That's the sound that I could hear. That was it. I don't remember pulling the trigger. I don't remember feeling the repercussion of the rifles. Nothing that. Just pack, pack, pack as I'm stumbling forward and I'm watching dust kick off the top of the berm in front of me from the machine gunners. And I remember thinking, I think I'm supposed to have a flag so they don't hit me as I'm getting pushed forward. I mean, it was just straight up mayhem, right? So we get to the end of the trench line. The team leader that was the only team leader that I remember making it there was Rogers. He is down as a heat case. Wilson is down. I don't remember who was behind me and pushing me. But we pop out of the trench line, and all the heat casualties are now starting to get laid out, and we're starting to triage them, basically. Poor Rogers, I will never forget. I was one of the few that was still up and walking, so they were like, okay, we need to get this guy out of here. So I remember I slung my rifle, and when I bent down, the pistol grip caught on my canteen. So it came off my shoulder, and that front sight post came down and cracked him right above his eyebrow. He was already a heat case, and I just basically concussed the guy with my weapon, which was very hot because I was shooting a lot of rounds through it. So I know it hurt him pretty bad. But he was already like out of it as it was. But we wound up getting everybody medevaced, and seriously, after that, after I hit him, everything was a blur. I don't really remember what happened after that at all, just because we were just in that mindset of straight survival. Organs were shutting down, like things were bad. But that was range 400. Anybody who's run range 400 has a similar type of a tale. I'll say that was the first time I was blown up. The second time I was blown up was Reed. We were in Croatia. We were on a horseshoe-shaped hill. I was on one flank, the extreme flank. He was on the other. He's supposed to shoot a AT-4 rocket to signal the attack. Okay, well, he's shooting from the prone. And if you're shooting an AT-4 rocket from the prone, you can't lay down directly behind it because the backblast will hit your legs. So you lay to the side, right? Well, one of the things that you have to teach people is that if you're shooting that, don't anticipate a recoil. It is a recoilless weapon. Because if you anticipate it and you push your shoulder, it'll come off your target, right? Well, Reed was shooting this way, and he pushed his shoulder so it shot across instead of down. And I was on the extreme flank over there. And I remember when that thing hit, it blew me onto my side. There was a column of dirt about that wide, that big. That was about 30 feet in the air. And it was kind of raining down on top of me. And I remember sitting there trying to figure out what happened as this dirt's kind of raining down on top of me. And I was like, wait a minute, did that just happen? And I look over, and Reed was really dark green Marine. So his palms were always like neon. You can see him. He's smiling and waving at me like, hey, you okay, buddy? You know? And I was kind of like, similar situation where they just got to pick me up and start pushing me forward. And I'm like, okay, we're signaling the attack. We're moving. Okay, and I'm shooting while I'm running and stumbling. I think it was my squad leader, actually, that was behind me, like trying to keep me moving forward because they were running and I was still on the ground. And it's a live fire range. So, you got to keep everybody online the best you can. So that was the second time I got blown up. I mean, I say those figuratively speaking. I mean, explosions happened in very close proximity and messed me up really bad. That's essentially what it was. Wow. So we're training. And we had just gotten a new bunch of lieutenants. And me and this guy did not get along at all. I nicknamed him Lieutenant Cutie Pie because he had an ego and I had an ego. So at this point, I was a very senior corporal. I had been a squad leader for years. I'd been the admin and stand-in platoon sergeant for several times. I was very seasoned at this point. So here comes this new lieutenant. And we're in the field training, and I wound up losing my mind with this guy. My company gunny actually saved my career this day because we were in an ambush site, and I was trying to explain to him that we're in green camis, so we shouldn't necessarily be in yellow grass with green camis, and all online while a mechanized company runs in front of us, and an entire company's worth of Marines get out, and we're going to ambush this company, and we're all online. We don't even have our flanks, refuted back on 45 degrees or capped off or anything. And I'm trying to get stuff through to him and he's just not hearing me. So I'm angry as it is. It comes time to break contact from this ambush that's going off, without a hitch. And two of my guys are just walking. And, when you vacate an ambush site, it's everybody gets up, they all right face because that's how you do it in Quantico. And everybody runs out of the ambush site. Well, these two are just walking, right? And they're just kind of lollygagging back there. So I'm like yelling at them to run, and they're just walking. And so I remember grabbing my M16 by the 6-inch barrel, and I end-over-ended that thing at them. I hucked at them like a throwing axe, and it hit a tree and shattered. And I'm just like, fucking run! And they looked at me when they saw that thing shatter, and they took off because they knew there was about to be some hell to pay. Well, I look over, and my lieutenant, Cutie Pie, his eyes are like as big around as saucers. He's like, Williams, get over here. And I was like, yeah, sir, what is it? You know, I can't believe you did this and you showed your ass today and you threw your weapon at a tree. And I was like, no, I was throwing it at the Marines. The tree got in my way, sir, and I know exactly what the fuck I'm doing, so you need to back off. Come here! And he's like yanking me over and he's yelling at me. The captain's there, company gunny's there. Company gunny's like, sir, I'm gonna take care of this. Takes me into the tree line, punches me once real good in the gut, and he's like, you need to learn to keep your mouth shut. Okay, I will help you, but shut the fuck up. And I was like, okay. He goes back, handles things with Lieutenant. I wound up not getting NJP'd, thank God. But he wanted my rank. I mean, he was like, that kid is done as far as I'm concerned. But again, I was kind of coming from a different environment. Later that day, company executive officer came flying up in a Humvee. And I remember he skid that thing sideways and he was out that door before the vehicle even stopped. And he's just yelling, we're under attack. And I'm like, okay, is this another training exercise? Like, what are you talking about? You know, all right, he's really getting into character now, you know? Turned out, he's like, the World Trade Centers got hit, the Pentagon just got hit, and there's another one that was headed for the White House, and they downed that plane before it got there. And we were like, wait a minute. Now, we were the mass casualty collection and QRF for the East Coast at that time. We used to call it Air Alert. We were on Air Alert. So we were on standby to go handle these things should they happen. We didn't even wait for the 7 tons to show up. We packed up our gear and we were just walking back, like 12 miles back to the barracks. But we didn't know what was going to happen. The base was locked down. There was no radio communications allowed. Like, everything was just locked. So it was just get your ass back to the barracks, start cleaning your weapons. Stand by for your junk on the bunk inspections, because we're most likely going to be going to pick bodies out of the World Trade Center in New York. You know, that's kind of what we were briefed, and that's all the information we knew. So I remember we got back to the barracks, and they put us in 2 rooms. My room, because I was, again, one of the senior squad leaders, and I had a TV. A lot of the rooms didn't have TVs back then, so I had a TV and cable. So we had the news on while we were, I had my whole squad in my room. We're cleaning the weapons, and we're watching the planes hit, because they're playing the B-roll over and over and over again, and we were just dumbfounded. It was just not real to us. Like, you're watching a movie, right? It's not real. There's no way that's real. Like, did that really happen that way? But judging by the demeanor on everybody's faces, you could see the weight of the reality on all of them, and how serious they were taking it. The best way I could describe it or give you something to compare it to is if you've ever come upon a car accident or a situation like maybe where there was a football player who got paralyzed on a field or something like that. If you watch the demeanor of the people who are actually dealing with the actual casualty itself or themselves, the looks on their faces, how heavy everything is, how serious it is, and there's a certain energy that you're going to pick up of people are dying right now. This is a very serious scenario. I remember that being so present at that point in time. I was like, okay, this is real. This is something that's going to change our lives forever. And I didn't have any idea as to what extent, until now, of course. But even back then, we knew it was serious. That was 9/11. That whole day, we were just cleaning weapons after that. So this is my 3rd med deployment now, right? So we actually deployed for the invasion on ships to the Mediterranean. And we deployed from Ceuta Bay, Crete. And for us, this was the Super Bowl. It was finally our chance to go in and get some, because we've been training forever and we weren't really part of the war on terror yet. So we were finally going to get in the fight, is the way we were all kind of looking at it, right? So we're in Ceuta Bay, Crete. I remember we're on the tarmac, and we're told we're going, then we're told we're not going, and then we're told we're going, and then we're told we're not going. And it gets to the point where it's so dull. You're just like, okay, whatever. Maybe we're going this time, maybe we're not. All the excitement, all the hype, it's all gone. So this time they had the ammo tent out at the back end of the tarmac, and they're like, okay, you're going, and we're like, okay. We go and we start loading up our ammo, and I'm like, okay, maybe it's real this time. I don't know. Okay, well, then now some more mop equipment is coming out, So, like, holy crap, our packs already weigh 200 pounds, and now they weigh 250 pounds. That was ridiculous. We couldn't stand up. But, we're getting more gear now, and I think this is real. We get on the C-130. Okay, the C-130 is actually moving down the strip now. It's actually happening. Okay, I think we're gonna go now, right? It wasn't until we were in the air that I was completely convinced that we're gonna go. So we fly in over Turkey and down over northern Iraq. And when we crossed the border into Iraq, I was talking to the crew chief on there. He's like, hey, just so you guys know, we're over Iraq right now. So if we start taking fire, you need to tell your guys to sit on their flak jackets. And I was like, yeah, okay, still wasn't real yet. I was like, yeah, sure, you guys can sit on the flak jackets. So then the C-130s did what's called a combat drop. Have you ever heard of that? Okay, so all of a sudden, everything just became weightless. Gear's going everywhere. Guys are coming up out of their seats. We're all like, what is actually happening? And they're dropping in hard on top of what we now know as the Arbil Air Force Base. So Special Forces had gotten there before us, and they knocked out all the power. And the pilots landed with their NVGs. And it was pitch black when we landed. So we had no idea where we were, right? We just hit the ground in some foreign country and everything's pitch black. We think it's Iraq. That's pretty much like the brief that we got. I'm making sure that everybody got all their gear when they're coming off the plane, right? You're a senior guy, you're gonna be the last ones off, make sure you've got your gear accountability up, right? So here I am, making sure everybody gets their stuff off the plane. Okay, everybody comes out and you got the big sign that says turn right. So everybody's turning right coming off the plane. And as I'm coming off of it and turning right, the pilot kicked up the RPMs and that rotor wash hit me. Picked my ass up and threw me about 15 feet. Now, if your pack weighs more than you, your pack went first. Right? So I landed upside down, getting choked out by my chin strap on my Kevlar. My feet were kind of doing like this in the air, and my pack was kind of laying on top of me, so I couldn't move, and it was pitch black. Nobody could even see me, right? And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, like, the Marines have landed. If there's an Iraqi soldier out there watching this, he's like, these guys are the United States Marines, like, this guy's gonna die, we're not gonna do anything. Like, you gotta be kidding me. So eventually I wind up kind of wiggling myself free, and it turns out when my pack flew over, it grabbed my butt pack and ripped everything out of it. So for the rest of the night, I'm walking around because I had to, find what I could, and then I found the guys because I could hear them whispering. Nobody had any idea what had happened to me. So I get over there and I'm like, hey, anybody have any leather gloves? And they're like, yeah, I found a pair over here. I was like, those are mine. Really, Williams? I'm like, yeah, thank you. Okay, anybody find a gas mask? Yeah, there's an extra gas mask right here. I'm like, that's mine. Thank you. So I'm getting my butt chewed by everybody, and they're all kind of mocking me a little bit because my stuff was everywhere and no one understood what happened. I got most of my gear back, but shortly after that is when the CH-53s landed to take us over to Mosul. 2 CH-53s landed. You can carry about 15 or 20 Marines combat loaded in a CH-53. Well, we've got a whole company sitting on the tarmac there. So they had to take us in sticks, basically. So when we went to Mosul, the Special Forces guys did the same thing where they knocked out all the power to the Mosul air base. And we landed there. And I was on the first wave that landed there. And I remember we jumped off those, well, actually, before I even get into that, we're flying low, we're flying fast. And again, I'm talking to the crew chief, and he's like, hey, get your guys sitting on their flak jackets right away. And I was like, yeah, okay. So I'm spreading the word. And I can see the helo in front of us, because we're doing like this over the rooftops. I can see the helo in front of us taking fire. And right about then is when it hit me, okay, we're actually in combat now. And then it dawned on me, they're the first helo. We're probably taking more fire than they are. And then it hit me, he just told us to sit on our flak jackets. It's because we're getting shot full of bullets right now. But because we're low and fast and there's so much noise, we just didn't even know what was happening. We're completely oblivious to the fact that we're getting riddled with bullets. We had no idea. So get everybody on their flak jackets. We fly in. Helos land in Mosul. We jump off the birds. Helos take off, and we're sitting in the middle of the tarmac. It's pitch black. We don't know which way is what. We just know that there's a seat of 2.5 million people, 10 corps of Iraqi infantry waiting for us, and there's 40 of us on the deck right now, and the helos just fly away. And I remember somebody going, so you guys want to go north, or like, what do you think we should do? Like, there was no brief on really how we should proceed at this point. We didn't know. So we're just sitting there like, yeah, north sounds good. Let's go north. We're kind of feeling our way really slowly going forward, and it took us what seemed like forever to cover 40 meters maybe. And we find this bunker that's kind of burned out, but we couldn't even make out what it was because all the power had been knocked out. So we're just kind of feeling our way forward until we found something that was a vertical structure, and we're like, okay, let's just encircle this and put our back to it until like the sun comes up, and then we'll find out what it is. Come to find out, the sun's starting to come up. Morning prayer goes on, which is that really spooky, ominous. Everybody who's been to Iraq knows what it sounds like when all the mosques start at different times, and it's like kind of this low drone as the sun's coming up, and the tule fog is starting to burn off, and it just felt like a horror movie. The first thing we see is this burned out bunker that we've been kind of encircled, and that was the only thing we knew in Iraq at that point in time. That's the only thing we understood as the sun is coming up. Turns out the Mosul air base has like this huge frontage of the city where it's literally like the wall and then there's the city. If we were briefed that there were 10 corps of Iraqi infantry in Mosul, and at this point we had all 140, some of us, I think 148 was our count at that point, on the air base, we're thinking it's like 148 Marines against like 10,000 Iraqi infantry, because at that point the Iraqi government was still in charge, right? Ba'ath Party was still in charge. So we're all freaking out, thinking to ourselves like, these guys are going to be, this is the last stand, this is like, we're ready for anything. Turns out when those Iraqi infantry heard that we had hit the ground there, they just like disintegrated. We had no idea, but they were just gone. They had no interest in fighting us whatsoever. As far as we were concerned, we were like, okay, there's 10,000 of them. There's 140 some of us. So that's like what, 75 apiece, like sweet, it's like we're really young and stupid about it. Sun comes up, we push out to the perimeter, we go firm, and the rest of the battalion starts ferrying in. So now our numbers are up, and they're like, we're going to attack the Ba'ath Party headquarters. And we're like, okay, we're going after the Ba'ath Party headquarters. So we didn't have a fight coming in, but the Ba'ath Party headquarters, that's like got to be where the fight's going to happen, right? Okay, so they load us up on flatbed trucks, like dragon wagons and 7 tons without anything on it, right? There's just piling Marines on. And they cart us through the city during rush hour. So here we are, like ready for the fight, and we're like stopped at a red light, waving to people like, hi, you're on your way to work. What's happening now? I thought I was going into like this rock'em sock'em, knock down, drag out fight, and now I'm just sitting here like waving to a little kid, thinking to myself, in 10 seconds I might be literally blowing that car up if I have to. Like it was such this weird paradox that was happening, right? So we get to the Ba'ath Party headquarters, and there's this huge crowd out in front of the Ba'ath Party headquarters. Ba'ath Party headquarters is about 20 or 30 rooms long and about 6 stories high. This big courtyard in the front, there's all these people chanting and going crazy as we pull up. And they just drop us off right in the middle of this crowd. It was right in front of the gate, but the crowd had surrounded the whole building pretty much, at least the very front. So as we're getting off, like the crowd is right here. We're jumping off the 7 tons. And they're clearly hostile. Like they don't want us there. So we get inside the perimeter of the gate, the Ba'ath Party headquarters. We start setting up fighting positions. And at that point in time, I was in weapons platoon. I was machine gun team leader. Okay, I'm an 0311 by trade, but they were like, we need people to be machine gunners. Williams, you're smart, so go be a machine gunner. I'm sitting there in my position, which is on a catwalk, kind of little outcropping. And they're like, hey, we need to start filling sandbags and hardening the position. So I'm running up and down the steps with these sandbags. I probably feel like 15 or 20 of them, and I'm like, enough. Like, I don't need any more sandbags up here. I'm exhausted. I don't need a couple hours of me doing this. I'm just burnt. I'm sitting there, and the crowd is getting more and more, I'm observing the crowd get more and more hostile. So eventually a car was driving by, they stopped the car, they pulled the guy out of it, they beat him to death, they flipped the car over, they blow it up. So the car's on fire, and the scene is starting to unfold in front of us where it's getting bad. Eventually they started shooting at us. And the first time some AK fire striped up the front of my sandbag position, all of a sudden I didn't have enough sandbags. I remember flinching because I was expecting to see those rounds or feel those rounds come through and hit me. I mean, I remember very clearly going like, it's happening. And all of a sudden I needed more sandbags immediately. Like I couldn't have had enough sandbags at that point. Lesson learned at that point. But we returned fire. There's 140 some Marines behind triggers, and that people started shooting at us from that crowd. I can't speak to how many people got hit, but I know every one of us was returning fire at that point. And if you look up the Mosul massacre, that was 1/8. It was public news. And we actually wound up getting booted out of the war for that. they evacuated us from theater because we were so poised and so ready that the slightest hint of hostility, every one of us reacted. And they were like, you can't do that. And we were like, then why are we in combat? If we can't do that, then we shouldn't be here. And they're like, you're right. Get your butt back on ship. And we stayed on ship for like 80 some days off of the coast of, I don't know if you remember when Monrovia, Liberia went crazy. It was about 70,000 rebels encircled the city and they were going to overthrow the government. So they're like, you guys are a bunch of violent morons. Go fight them. And they wouldn't fight us either. But there is a really interesting thing that happened while we were there. And that is, I'd never heard of jets using their sonic boom as a weapon before. Because for 2 days, they were surrounding us and they were threatening to overrun our perimeter. And it was the way the insurgents did things back then, is that they would throw a bunch of civilians in front of them and hide behind them and shoot at us, right? Knowing that if we returned fire, or counting on the fact that we wouldn't return fire, that they could get away with it, essentially, and they could pick their targets. Well, from our reaction the first day, we weren't quite kicked out yet. The second day, it happened again, and our forward air controller called in a bunch of F-15s. I say a bunch, it was 2 F-15s. And they flew in at rooftop level. And when I say rooftop level, I mean like maybe 30 feet off the ground. Supersonic. They flew in about 30 feet off the ground, supersonic. And I remember I was on the second deck. The guys that were on the 4th floor were at eye level with the pilots. And when they came in supersonic, they let that sonic boom hit the ground. I thought they dropped bombs. I thought like things blew up. And by the time my vision restored, because it rocked my freaking world, the crowd was gone. I mean, it was like that boom repelled the entire crowd. I don't know how many lives those pilots saved by using the sonic boom instead of waiting for the crowd to start shooting at us again. But it was an incredible thing. I've never heard of it since. I did hear about it on a documentary, but it was talking about Mosul. But it was an incredibly effective weapon. Just the sonic boom scared the crap out of everybody so bad, it was just dispersed the crowd. It was amazing. But then later that night, they had surrounded us. They were burning garbage, so we couldn't use our thermals because the heat from the fires was pluming out all of our thermals, so we couldn't see. And then the smoke was pluming out all of our night vision, so we couldn't see anything past that. So they'd surrounded us with trash fires, and out of nowhere, a bunch of special forces guys come in with a bunch of chicken trucks that they stole. And they're like, everybody get on the trucks now. And we were like, what's going on? They're like, you're about to get messed up. We got to get you out of here. They've been planning for several hours now, and they've got positions set up all around and they're closing in. And if we don't get you guys out of here, then it's going to be the end of it. We got to get you out of here. So there was this weird energy that all of a sudden started to crackle through everybody. We're getting thrown onto these chicken trucks. I'm talking like cattle. Okay, like we're standing room only type stuff, and people are hanging on to whatever they can. And these chicken trucks are being escorted out by a bunch of UN vehicles with 50 cals on them. And they hauled us out of there as fast as they possibly could back to the base. They wound up, later we found out that we were completely surrounded by rocket teams, and they were just gonna start pummeling that building with us inside of it. So they saved us that day. Wow. And got us back to the base safely. The idea of a bunch of Marines being surrounded by a crowd, that crowd started to fire on those Marines. There really was no training or official policy on what we should do. I forget what movie it was, but there was a Samuel L. Jackson and Tommy Lee Jones movie that came out later on where that very scenario happened. And, the colonel was getting raked over the coals for it. What Hollywood fails to understand when it comes to that, in a civilian world would fail to understand when it comes to things like that, is during that incident, the order was passed to fix bayonets because they were overrunning the perimeter. And with that many people, they don't have to have guns. That many people will overrun us and rip us limb from limb, even though we all have weapons, because you can't pull the trigger fast enough. And it's a really hard thing to fathom in a scenario like that. But because that had happened to us, and that was the scenario we were in, they didn't really know how to handle it, so they just mysteriously flew us right back out of there. We were replaced by the 101st Airborne. And when they came in, they flew us out of there and put us on ship for 80 some days during the invasion of Iraq. So it's pretty clear, like, you're done, get out. Second combat deployment. I'm back with 1st Platoon now. So I'd gone through every platoon in the company at this point, right? Because I'd been with the company for 4.5 years. So they fly us in, we get to Al-Assad, and they start briefing us on the AO that we're going to, which is out in the Anbar province, 90 miles from the Syrian border, out in the middle of nowhere. So we essentially get this feeling that we're getting shunned, right? Because we want back into the fight, right? Like we were kicked out the first time, so we want back in now, right? We get out to ASP Wolf, which is an ammo dump for the Iraqi army that had been abandoned. And a bunch of some army guys got in there ahead of us, and they decided they were gonna blow up the entire arsenal there. So they put some C4 in a big pile, and they threw all of the ordnance on top of that, and they blew that C4. Well, when that went, it scattered ordnance all over the desert. So we were out there to guard that, to make sure that the insurgents couldn't pick up all those and turn them into IEDs and all that stuff, right? So that was our job, was to babysit a bunch of unexploded ordnance out there, essentially. So we were hating life. But I'll never forget when we pulled in, administrative buildings around that ammo supply point were inhabited by a bunch of people that were living on top of food refuse that was knee deep. And it was just slime everywhere with these guys. So we had to kick them out and had to start cleaning all that stuff out of there so we could have a place to live and operate. And I will never forget offloading that convoy. Everything was in boxes and whatnot, and then the convoy just kind of pulls away and disappears over the horizon. And here we are again in this scenario where it's like, does anybody know how to work a generator? Like we're gonna build our living in life support conditions from scratch right here, right now. And none of us have been trained how to do this. So here we are again with this, just like, figure it out, this is combat, congratulations, learn it on the way. We get everything cleaned out, we get everything set up, and we're running our operations from this ASP where we're just kind of going out on patrols and we're really not doing anything. And every now and again, like, an IED would go off and it was like the big event, right? Like, oh my God, an IED went off. No one was hurt, but this was us in combat. And we're like, there's gotta be more. Like, this sucks out here, it's miserable. So then the word comes down, okay, you guys have been tapped to lead the assault on Fallujah. And we're like, okay, what's Fallujah? We don't know. And they're like, well, it's the city of mosques. The contractors had been, the 4 contractors on the contractor bridge, they'd been hung, bodies burnt, dragged through the streets. So we knew it was potentially a real serious scenario. But again, the Marine Corps has this way of ruining anything sacred, right? We were told we're going, then we're told we're not. And we're told we're going, and we're told we're not. So by the time it comes time for us to actually go there, we were it was dull to us. We were like, okay, here we go again. So I remember loading the convoy up. There wasn't room for me on the truck, so I actually rolled from ASP Wolf into Camp Fallujah, riding in between the cab of the 7-ton and the bed of the 7-ton. On the little step that was like right next to the exhaust. I rode outside the truck the entire way there. We pull into Camp Fallujah. We get oriented, we get our berthing spaces and whatnot, and then we start going into this training routine where it still wasn't real yet. You're going, no, you're not. Yes, you are. No, you're not. Yes, you are. No, you're not. It's October, and we would have times where we could call our family and whatnot. So my Aunt Karen, she had asked if she could send some Christmas gifts to some of the guys who maybe didn't have family or something like that. So I got permission from the command. I was able to give names to my Aunt Karen. And she had a bunch of friends that were like, hey, we want to get in on this too. So they wound up adopting pretty much every person in the company and giving gifts to us for Christmas, right? So this really interesting scenario plays out later on where a lot of the guys that they adopted wound up either dying or getting wounded in medevac, and nobody knew what happened. So these people who had adopted these Marines to give them Christmas presents wound up making contact with their families. And this really tight-knit, amazing kind of family-oriented community sprang up from that. And that's why Bravo Company 1-8 is still, to this day, we all stay in touch with each other the way that we do. While we're at Camp Fallujah, we're all just kind of, marking time and training and trying to figure out like what's gonna happen. And sure enough, it comes down, it's time to load up. Okay, so we're actually doing it now, right? No, just kidding, no, you're not. Okay, this time, no, you're really doing it. So we load up, we get on the tracks, and we roll around to the north side of the city, where we sit for 24 to 32 hours, we'll say, right there, watching them bombard the city with white phosphorus. Now, we'd never seen really like white phosphorus like that before. And if you've never seen a plume of white phosphorus, when the shell goes off, It looks almost like a Portuguese man of war because there's like the big explosion, but then all the particles that rain down leave little smoke trails behind. So the whole city is burning, and you've got these little plumes all over the city. So you can kind of see the scene here as we're about to make the invasion. Word comes down, okay, we're actually going in now. So again, it's real. And I remember when I got the word, I went to Aubrey McDade, who later won the Navy Cross there. And I told him, I said, look, man, you know, you're my boy, you're my brother here. And for whatever reason, if anybody makes it out of this battle, it has to be you. Because I knew McDade was the type of guy that leads from the front. He's going to be like the one that charges the machine gun nest. I just knew how he thought about things. He's very linear. So I told him, like, dude, watch yourself in there. You've got to make it out of this alive, all right? And he was kind of like, yeah, whatever, Will. Don't worry about it. You know, I'm like, oh, okay, sure. So we get in the tracks, and we start the assault on the city. And we started the assault on November 8th, which is actually my birthday. So for my 24th birthday, we invaded Iraq, the Fallujah, Iraq. The formation that we were in, because we were in 1st platoon, so it was my lieutenant's track in front of me. I was back on his left flank, and my platoon sergeant was back on his right flank, and then the rest of the assault force was strung out on our flanks there. So I was like on the 2nd echelon going in. I was like right in the front. And I remember I was in the TC hatch. I had it cracked at 10% because you can lock it at 10%, and I could see it. It looked like the Death Star. If you remember, like in Star Wars, when they're making the run down through the Death Star, where you're seeing these tracers come out, and it's just really surreal scene where it's like, are they shooting at us? I mean, I guess they're shooting at us. Those are tracers. So yeah, but they're not really shooting at anything like targeted. It's all just kind of like sporadic, kind of blowing past us. And I remember thinking, okay, this is actually going to happen now. And I had no idea what we were really getting into at this point. We're assaulting a city that's been inhabited by insurgents for several months, preparing for us to assault, because we told everybody we were coming in. They had done the first assault back in April, pulled everybody out, and then said, okay, we're going to assault later on. So gave them 6 months to prepare for us. And here we are in November now doing the actual assault. So we knew it was going to get hairy. We were told that there were 8,000 insurgents in the city, and we were expecting at that point, we were going to take about 80 to 90% casualties. So we were all in the fight for our lives as far as we were concerned. This is it. This is the Super Bowl. Finally, we're going to make history, and we're going to do what we've been training to do forever, right? So we get there, and the chaos that erupts from first contact in combat is very difficult to describe if you've never experienced it. We offloaded those tracks, and some of that white phosphorus actually blew up over our heads and was raining white phosphorus down on top of us. And I remember the Marine in front of me, his pack was on fire, and I was telling him to take it off, and his boot was also on fire, and he was trying to like kick dirt over his boot to like put the fire out. And I was explaining to him, like, this is a chemical fire, like you've got to take your boot off. It'll burn right through, it's going to keep going. You're not putting the fire out. I have no idea to this day who that Marine was or what happened to his boot. I do remember him starting to take his boot off, though, while it was on fire and burning at 5,000 degrees at the front of the assault of the biggest battle in the Iraq War, right? So, I mean, I don't know what happened to his boot or what happened to that Marine. I'm sure I knew who he was, but I couldn't recall who it is now. Everybody gets into their first positions, and I remember we're on this rooftop, and it still wasn't real yet. You know, like, we've been training for this so often, and we've been told we're going in and not going in so many times, your mind doesn't really comprehend what's happening. So we're on this rooftop, and there's these two guys that are about a block down, and they're kind of peeking out from behind this building. And Nathan Anderson, who was killed later on, about 3 days later, he's like, can I shoot at him? And I was like, yes, you can shoot at him. He's got a 203. He's like, can I use the 203? And I'm like, yes, you can use the 203. Kill them. Then he was like, okay, boom. One shot, nailed it. And I remember thinking, like, okay, we've actually killed people now. Maybe this is real. But it still, my mind still didn't want to believe it was real. So later on, the sun's coming up now, and we've pushed forward, and we're about to hit our first battalion objective, which is the cultural center. And if you've read anything about Fallujah and whatnot, you know the assault on the cultural center was brutal. When it came time to actually do the assault, 3rd platoon was going to make the assault. 1st platoon was in an overwatch position. Right before they assaulted, we got attacked from behind. And it was the first time I really was able to comprehend what combat was. everything we'd gone through in Mosul still was very surreal. Like, it wasn't actual gunfighting. It was just returning fire, which we'd done so many times in training, it just didn't feel real. In this scenario, these guys jumped out of their car. I don't know what they were thinking, but they jumped out of their car with RPGs and AK-47s and a bunch of RPKs and everything, and they thought they were going to take it to us. And you've got 20-some Marines down behind cover, all shooting at these guys as they're getting out of their vehicle and just dropping them in the street. Like, they didn't stand a chance. It was just overwhelming firepower. And I'll never forget, this is the first person that I actually targeted and shot multiple times, where he got out of his car and he fell down the street and he crawled over behind this metal bin. And we hadn't been trained as to what a hammered pear was yet. With the type of round that an M16 shoots, it's a very small round. It travels very quickly and it pokes a little hole, which means, it's not like the movies where you shoot somebody and they like explode and die immediately, right? So I was shooting this guy. I shot him 19 times. And I was shooting like you shoot on the rifle range, So you shoot and then you take a breath and you wait for your natural respiratory pause and slow trigger control and you shoot again. And he kept moving and he kept moving and he kept moving. And I wasn't the only guy shooting at these guys down there, but there was like 2 or 3 of them that were still alive. Later on, I had learned that when my platoon sergeant went down there, he did this really weird thing where he sat down next to this guy and he lit a cigarette and kind of rolls his helmet back and he says, "You're playing a man's game soon. You understand that?" Like, he's talking to the guy as the guy's like bleeding out and wheezing and struggling for breath. That guy was pumped full of holes. And he was hopped up on whatever drug it was, adrenaline or something. We found a bunch of hypodermic needles all through the city. So whatever drug they were using to keep them going and to give them the courage to fight us. But it took him 5 or 6 minutes easily before he actually perished. And I don't know how many times he was shot. I mean, 15, 20, 30 times maybe, he'd been shot. It was absolutely ridiculous. So while we were down there is when 3rd Platoon shot across the street to hit the cultural center. That's where Lonnie Wells got killed. That's where Doc Lambot and Sam Chris got shot. That's where Kenny Hudson got shot. All these guys, those 3 were wounded. But the scenario basically is 3rd Platoon starts their assault. Lonnie Wells gets dropped in the street. Gunny Shane goes back to help him and bends over to grab him, and he got shot like 3 or 4 times in the back and like right up at the back of his legs and into his intestines. And then Doc Lambot doubled back to help him out, and then Doc Lambot got hit. So these guys are dropping in the street basically, and we're getting the casualties pulled out of the street. We get word that 3rd Platoon's in trouble. So we roll back from our casualty collection for the bad guys that were there, that we were down there kind of doing the SSE on there, collecting intelligence on them. And we come back out to support them, and then we wind up running across the street. When I ran across the street, I remember like there's this little half wall that I jumped over the top of. And when I landed on the other side of that wall, I landed on about 30 Marines that were in this tiny room, smaller than this garage. Because we had all kind of pinpointed that same thing and ran right to it because we were under fire. So you turn into a pack animal at that point. You're just trying to survive it. The world's erupting all around you, so you don't really, there's no like, let me think and calculate here. You're just reacting. So jump over that wall, realize what's happening, and we've got to get inside the cultural center, right? Because we're in a bad way and we can't really return fire on this mosque that's like raining fire down on us. So I remember gathering the courage that it takes to come out from behind cover, run about 40 yards exposed to that mosque under fire, and then turning and running up, it felt like 1,000 steps. But you got to turn your back to that mosque and run up all these little steps to get inside of the cultural center. We get inside that cultural center. 10 seconds later, American artillery is dropped on that cultural center while we're in it. That was the first and only time I ever really freaked out. Because there was a guy, he's kind of known for being a spaz, and he had been shot through his bicep earlier, so he was all hopped up on morphine. And I get up there and I see him, and he doesn't have his body armor on. American artillery starts falling on that building, so I jump over the top of him. I'm like, "We got to get you out of here." And he's like, "Bro, just relax, man. Don't worry about it." I was like, "Well, he's like, you're a spaz. Like, how am I the one spazzing out right now? I'm known for being calm, but if that roof comes down, you're dead." He was like, "Yeah, don't worry about it." I was like, what is happening right now? Like, the world is upside down. Like, up is down and water isn't wet right now. The American artillery finally gets called off, There were about 3 Marines that were wounded from it, but nobody was killed from it, thank God. Zarqawi was the big guy that we were going after in Fallujah at that point in time. So his family compound was supposedly on the other side of that the cultural center. So there's a kind of a famous picture of me coordinating fire on his compound right there. I look like nothing is happening. I'm sitting there, I got my weapon down to the side, I'm keying my little squad radio, coordinating fire. But if you look, there's like shell casings all around me. There's another Marine that's got like a smoke coming out of the barrel of his 203. You know, there's another one that's running back because he's out of ammo. You know, and I'm just kind of sitting there like, you know, hey, okay, cool. You know, just again, I was sort of in a daze, you know, just really nonchalant the entire time. The guy who took the picture is named Ashley Gilbertson. He was one of the New York Times reporters that was embedded with us. And I remember later on, I saw that picture and I was like, Ash, like, dude, you couldn't get a picture of me doing something cool, like jumping over a wall or throwing a grenade or kicking something. And he's like, dude, this was you during the entire battle. You were just chill the entire time, like it wasn't even happening. And I was like, that's interesting. I didn't realize that I had, you know, that same nonchalant kind of, my brother, if he's dead, it's his time to go, it's his time to go, you know, had played through to a point where I realized I was uniquely suited for these types of situations, which is why I've got a different type of PTSD from all of it. I don't have like the flashbacks or anything like that. It manifests a different way with me. But anyway, so we wind up needing to get an ammo supply because we wasted all of our ammo pretty much on that mosque to get all of our guys out of the streets and everything. We'd blown everything. And so I remember the lieutenant that rolled up there. I'm not going to out him here, but he rolled up, threw open the doors of his Humvee and just kicked all the ammo out into the middle of the street and then took off. And so for us to resupply, we had to come out of the building, down those steps, all 1,000 of those steps. It was probably more like 50, but it felt like 1,000. And then pick up ammo cans and ammo crates and run those back up the steps. Well, we've been fighting for hours at this point. We were exhausted. So it's not like we were moving fast and we were completely exposed for a ridiculous amount of time. And I remember thinking I wanted that guy's head on a freaking platter for doing something so stupid as to throw all that crap out there in the middle of the street, not use your vehicle as a blocking thing, not coordinate as you're coming in so then we can like get our fire suppressing so we can make sure we get down there. None of that. Just threw open the back of his Humvee, tossed it all on the street and then took off. So I gather a couple of guys, we go down there, you know, I need a working party in the middle of a firefight, and we're gonna go down there and pick up this ammo and run it back inside. So we do, we get everything aside, no one got hurt, thank God. And we wind up going firm that night in the cultural center and getting ready to push out the next day once we got everybody resupplied. So the next day we're pushing out, pretty uneventful that day, a couple of firefights here and there, but then that night, is when we lost Nathan Anderson. Russell got hit. Anyway, our first fire team, basically we're coming up on an alleyway and we were turning right to go down the alley. And our first fire team got lit up by 2 machine gun positions down there. And I remember when the fire started, I was in the back. So my job, I was a platoon guide at that point. So I was like a senior sergeant and they didn't really know what to do with me. So they made me the guide. My purpose and function in the battle space was I would establish the initial casualty collection point because I had a corpsman that was attached to me. I would establish the initial casualty collection point and triage and stabilize so then the platoon sergeant could come on later on, hold the casualty collection point, and I could push forward with the assault. So if we took more casualties, I'd establish another casualty collection point. And that way we could keep the assault rolling forward a lot faster. We wouldn't get bogged down with casualties. So at this point in time, I was in the rear. I hear the ambush take off down the alley there, and I grabbed one of the saw gunners, Lance Corporal Mora, and I remember thinking, okay, everybody's stacked up on one side of this alley, so if they concentrate their fire on that corner, we're done. I need to split the fire. So I grabbed Mora and I ran across the alley right there. I get to the other side, there's about 8 155 rounds that are all wired together in a big-ass IED. And I turned around, and it was like one of those, I felt like a cartoon, like my legs realized it before my upper half did, and they had turned around and were running the opposite direction before my upper half caught up with it. And I'm screaming IED. And I remember Mora, he gathered the courage to run across that alley in the first place with all that fire happening. Like just 2 machine guns are just pouring lead down that alleyway. So we're exposed completely running across it. He stops in the middle of that alleyway and he's looking at me, realizing that there's a huge IED over there. And he turned around and he booked it back. We both made it twice across that alleyway without getting hit. McDade at that point had pushed down the alley into the darkness to go find the Marines who got hit. And this is when he made, I call it a Medal of Honor run, to be honest with you. It got downgraded to a Navy Cross, but I really believe to this day it should be a Medal of Honor. Because 3 times he went back down that alley to find Marines that were wounded or killed and pulled them out of there. And several times, I mean, he was jumping over because he could see the tracers coming, you know, and he'd like dive over it, throw the Marine and then dive over the fire and then pick the Marine back up and keep running. While he was doing that, I was with a squad up on the rooftops. We were jumping rooftop to rooftop. And it was the first time I'd fired my weapon so many times that I couldn't get the magazine out of the magazine well. I couldn't hold the handguards because they were so hot. I was grabbing my sling and holding the sling kind of like to the side and shooting as fast as I could because we were trying to pour fire down at the end of the alley to keep the fire off McDade. We couldn't see him. We just knew he was moving down there. So we were trying to keep that fire off of him. And I don't have any idea how effective our fire was to this day. I couldn't tell you. But he wound up making that trip 3 times. He pulled Anderson out. And Anderson was one of the hardest deaths ever because I heard him realize he was going to die. And we couldn't get to him because of the fire, the amount of enemy fire that was coming down the alleyway. First, he was angry. I mean, Anderson had a lot of fight. He was an outstanding Marine, and he was really strong character. So when he got hit, he was more just pissed that he got hit. And he's screaming for help, and he's like, get me the fuck out of here, you guys. Like, Jesus Christ, I got hit. Come on, hurry up. Get me out of here. Get me out of here. And then that slowly changed to, oh my God. And I'll never forget hearing him say, oh my God, because that's when he knew he was going to die. And then his cries got weaker and weaker until it was just no longer there. And then I knew we'd lost him. So McDade, he got Russell out, and he got Godoy and Dominich out. So the whole team, really, McDade had rescued out of there. But we were reeling from that. We didn't know, like it was the first person we had lost in our platoon at that point. And we were just kind of in a mental shock. And the order came down, okay, sorry, but the assault has to go on. You know, like we're not stopping because somebody got hurt or killed. We're going. So we kept pushing. And later that night, we wound up in another situation where we were clearing a house out. An insurgent was on the 2nd floor. We think our squad leader stepped on a pressure plate going up a staircase, on the first landing on a staircase, and it blew his face off pretty much. Nosler, Jacob Nosler, he survived it. But we wound up taking, I think, 6 or 7 casualties in that house. They weren't killed, but everybody was wounded, bad enough to get medevaced out. So we were already in mental shock from that one team getting hit the way that they did. And then 6 or 7 more get hit in that house. So we were just like beside ourselves. And I remember my platoon sergeant, he was like, scrape together what's left of my platoon and go kill that motherfucker. And I was like, okay. Well, we had attachments with us. And I didn't want to clear the house with machine gunners or, you know, guys with small guns and all that type. So I'm like, okay, I don't know how many 11s are left at this point. I remember being in the quad, and I'm like, okay, if you're an 0311, I need you to stand on my left. And if you're an attachment, I need you to stand on my right. Okay, I've got like 14 guys left in the platoon that are still 0311s. So we're gonna go clear this house. So, you know, as per the doctrine, I'm about to enter the house, so I'm gonna frag the house, right? So as I'm about to frag the house, I tell the kid who's on point, Brian Cam, I'm like, hey, prep that grenade and get ready. And so he preps the grenade, and then it comes over the intercom or the radio. My captain is like, hey, we need to mitigate collateral damage. We need to make sure we're not, you know. And I'm like, we just took so many casualties in this freaking house. I'm going to clear it with a grenade first, at the very minimum, you know. And he's, no, you're not, and da 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 da. So then I wind up telling everybody to turn their tack lights on because it was the middle of the night and it's, you know, there's no power, right? So everything's super dark. And I was assuming one of the reasons why they got hit the way they did is because they couldn't really see anything because we were trying to be clandestine, even though it's Block 3 combat, we're blowing the crap out of everything. we're trying to mitigate collateral damage. So I was like, no, everybody turn your tack lights in. I want this place lit up like freaking Christmas. And so we make entry on the house. I don't bang the house going in, or I don't throw the frag to initiate our entry, but it's all lit up. And I don't remember this happening, but it's said that over the people that were listening to my traffic with the captain on the radio, I was ordered to shut the lights off again. And I was like, sir, once the lights come on, they don't go off. And then my call sign was Beowulf 1 Charlie. I was like, Beowulf 1 Charlie, out. And I just clicked off my radio. And I was done at that point. And they were like, you can't do that to Beowulf 6, man. Like, you can't just cut off communication with the captain. And I was like, I don't care. I'm clearing this house, and so many guys have been hitting this house at this point. Everything's in chaos, and we're going to clear this house. I'm not losing guys to argue over the radio right now whether I should have my tack lights on or not. So we clear the house out, and we declare it safe. So our casualty collection point, the ambulances are coming in. We've got some tanks rolling in to suppress things for us. About an hour later, here comes Cam. And his face is white, and he's got his hands on this grenade still. And he's like, Sergeant, what do I do with this? And I was like, you've been running around like that with this whole, he's like, this entire time, because I had him prep it, but he didn't get to throw it. And he did not know what to do with it. So he just sat there with a death grip on this thing, like watching his imminent death and be let go. So I was like, give me that thing. And I took it and like let the spoon fly and like tossed it over my shoulder, super nonchalant about something. And he was like, really? I could have just tossed it? I'm like, we're in Block 3 combat, dude. Like, there's fire and explosions happening everywhere. Yeah, just frag out and let us know. And he was just like, but I'll never forget the look on his face when he was just like white knuckling this thing like, oh my God, what do I do with this? We got to the edge of the city, and that's when we lost Ski, Zakowski. He was one of the snipers that was with us, and there was a sniper that we had all nicknamed the Chechnyan, that Ski was kind of playing cat and mouse with, because the guy was good. And so, snipers, they usually snipers will hunt other snipers, right? If they know there's another sniper in the area. So they were after each other quite a bit, and that sniper had taken out several guys from our sniper platoon already. And I'll never forget that we were at the end of that city, and I had taken my Kevlar off, and I was sitting down, and he was relieving somebody up on watch. And he walked by, and he like that on my hair. And I was like, yeah, we made it. He goes, yeah, we're not done yet. And I was like, no, we're not, but we're at the edge of the city, man. He's like, yep, feels good. And he just kept walking. 90 seconds later, I heard what sounded like a gunshot in the room that he was in. Turns out the sniper that hit him was so close that when the round impacted Ski, he shot him right in the head, right past his scope. When the round hit him, it made such a sound that it sounded like a gunshot. That's how hard that round hit him. And I remember thinking it was a negligent discharge. So I went running up in that room, and I'm like, what the fuck happened? And his spotter was like, he got shot. And I'm like, was it a negligent discharge? I'm trying to figure out what happened. He's like, no. And at that point, so many other people had flooded into the room. And I'm like, I'm an extra set of hands here. I need to back out of the situation, let them handle it. Later on is when I found out that the sniper was right across the street. And when he got shot, he got hit so hard it sounded like a gunshot. So, it kind of blew my mind, because 90 seconds before that, he had just ruffled my hair, and said, we almost made it. So it was hard for me to deal with. And I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, I got to make sense of this in my head. This is insane to me. Ski was just right there, and now he's gone. And Ski was the type of guy, everybody loved Ski. Like when you're in 0311, when the sniper platoon guys are like, you guys are doing a killer job, and they speak highly of you, it feels good. It means something, because you look up to the sniper guys. And Ski was that guy. Every time we did something great, he was the first one to applaud us about stuff. Just incredible dude. So his loss was felt throughout the entire battalion. I mean, he was that kind of a dude. And then after we lost Ski, we got the word that because we'd pushed through the city so quickly, a lot of the insurgents had squirted around us and hidden in houses. So now we had to go back through the city and kick in every single door and clear every single house. So if you could imagine the mind fuck that happens when you just went through this crazy scenario, like half the platoon is gone at this point from either being killed or wounded. You made it. You're at the final objective, and then you're told, actually, you're just getting started. If you cleared 15 buildings on the way down here, you're going to clear another 150 by the time this is done. Like, you may be 10% complete right now. So, all right, suck it up. The mission has to go on. So we do Operation Goat Herder, I think is what we nicknamed it. We go back to a school that we had passed on the way down, and we fortified that school. And we ran operations out of that school for the next 4 weeks. The schedule while we were there was absolutely brutal because you were 4 hours on QRF, 4 hours on patrol, 4 hours on watch. So we were running 2 missions a day, and there just was no such thing as downtime for the next month, pretty much straight. About 2 weeks into that, I'm a little fuzzy on the timeline, but about 2 weeks is when we lost Gavriel and Brown, Lance Corporals Gavriel and Brown. And essentially what happened was we were on our patrol, it was our turn. We had gotten some intel that there might have been insurgents in this house, gone into that house to clear it, and a bunch of gunfire had erupted. I'll never forget, Lance Corporal Brown came running out, and I saw him run into a telephone pole. He was just at a dead bolt coming out, hits a telephone pole, falls down. I grab him, pull him to the side. He had been shot several times in the front and in the side. It was later discussed, I don't know if this is exactly how it was, but that the rounds had hit him and he kind of threw his arms up when he was flying back, and then they got him. This was our only vulnerable spot, really. And most of the guys that we lost had been shot through the side right here, which is why we started wearing side sappies later on, because it was a very common place for us to get hit. I remember working on Brown, and the texture of the blood that was coming out of him, it was like cranberry sauce. It was really clumpy and really slippery, sticky. And I was telling him that he had to stay calm, and he kept telling me he couldn't see because his hysteria had hit a point where he was blind, which is why he ran into that telephone pole. He didn't even see it. I remember seeing the pain come in waves where like I could get him to calm down so we could work on him. And then after about 30 seconds or so, he'd start to arch his back again. And as he was arching his back again and starting to like grimace and hurt again, it was the pain hitting him in a wave. And then I could get him to calm back down a little bit, and then we could start working on him again. And in the middle of that, there's a hand on my shoulder, and it's my platoon sergeant. And he's like, I know you're working on this, man, but I'm here and you've got a job to do, which was go in there and get him, get the guys who got Gavriel and Brown. So I grabbed a couple guys, and we made entry on that house. And I think I fragged that room that guy was in 7 times. And there was no way I was going to let anybody around that corner and let this guy ambush us again. Not a chance. So I just kept banging that room. And finally, when I was out of frags and we're going to go in that room, we're making entry, he had crawled up right next to the door. And when we booted that door, it hit him. And I remember his arm just kind of fell down. And he was sitting there kind of like breathing, trying to gather breath. I just blew him up 7 times pretty much. I forget who it was, but they finished the job. And then we drug him out of the house and we put him in the front yard because we wanted our guys to see that we had gotten him. Because at that point, the morale was so heavy, it was so low, that this guy, he'd actually, a couple hours before, had waved to us because of our ROEs at that point in time. I mean, regardless of what a lot of people think, we don't want to just kill everything, Even what we might even say, we don't want to kill everything. So the ROEs at the time was we had to have positive ID and we had to have a positive threat. We had to know it was a threat. So if they had dropped their weapons and they weren't a threat, then we weren't shooting them. So this guy had waved to us earlier with no weapons, so we had let him pass. Even though we're roaming through the battle space and kicking in doors and fighting people who are fighting us, he didn't have a weapon, so we had let him pass. And now he'd killed 2 of us and wounded like 4 other of us. That's why I wasn't having any mercy with this guy at all, and why I banged him 7 times before we went in the room. But our interpreter got hit and killed. Moo, he was like 70 years old. He hated the insurgents more than we did. He wanted us to like dismember them. He was a savage dude. But he was old, and he got killed. Gavriel got killed, and Brown got killed. Gavriel actually worked in the World Trade Center. And he had, I forget how many hash marks tattooed on him, but those were the friends that he lost in the World Trade Center. So he's a very successful guy and decided to join because he wanted to do what was right, to not avenge them per se, but to do something about it. So he's an incredible guy. And then Lance Corporal Brown, he was like everybody's little brother. You know, he was just an incredible dude who we all knew and loved, and was very kind, very respectful. Not like I was when I was a boot, constantly with an attitude problem. Anything I asked that kid to do, he would do. And he had heart problems and asthma, and he never let it get to him. Like, I'd see him suffer through it, and he just was not going to back down, no matter what. You know, just an incredible guy. Once we got that house cleared out, there was several other houses, several other ambushes that we went through, but not really anything significant. We didn't lose anybody else. A lot of insurgents got taken out. Actually, I'm going to back up because I forgot to tell you guys about Billy Miller. We lost Billy Miller going after a picture in a mosque. So there's a sniper that was in a mosque, and the New York Times reporters that were with us wanted to get a picture of the sniper's body in the mosque so then they could tell the world that it wasn't a war on Islam. We weren't just there to destroy their holy places, that the insurgents were using these as firing platforms. So I was tapped to go take a patrol out and go escort these reporters so they could go get a picture of this guy. We get down on the scene, and we're send the squad up to go clear out the minaret so then they can actually get a picture and locate this body. And, you know, there's a gunshot, and everybody comes flooding out of the minaret, and Billy Miller got shot, and apparently the insurgent was laying down. And you ever been inside of a minaret before? There's like a center column, and then the steps wrap around in a really, really tight circle. So if you're climbing the minaret, a lot of times that center pole is like right here, so you can't even see around the corner right there. That insurgent was laying down, and when Billy got hit, it was probably 2 or 3 inches from his face when he got hit. So everybody came running out. You know, and they're like, Billy got hit, Billy got hit. You know, well, there's no way we're leaving him. I ordered everybody to fire up on that mosque and just shake that guy up as best they could. And I led 3 times up that ladder well to go get Miller. On the 3rd time, we got him, and we pulled him down, and we were able to get him to safety. And the reporters blamed themselves for Billy's death. You know, and I made it a point to tell them, even though I made it a point to tell them, like, guys, this is combat. This is what we do. You know, this is not your fault. And this was an important thing to say and a story to be told. Both Ashley and Dexter both still blame themselves to this day for it. And every chance I get, I try to remind them that it's not their fault, but it weighs heavy on them. The other story, the last story I was going to tell about Fallujah, is where I had realized how savage we'd become. So we'd been in this certain position for like 2 or 3 days, and we'd killed a guy a couple days prior in the street. And I was running across the street for something, started getting fired at, so I kind of pulled this like slide into home plate move behind this guy's body. And I remember specifically the crows had pecked out his eyes. So I'm down behind this guy and coordinate the fire, get my guys to suppress the fire. And he was kind of laying in the street with his arm flopped over. And he had these 2 bills, 2 lira hanging out of his pocket, or dinar, or whatever they call it over there. Anyway, and I remember I stood up, and I kind of like really playfully, I plucked the bills out of his pocket, and I patted him on the shoulder, and I was like, better luck next time, playa. And I took off. And I remember later on thinking to myself, like, who does that? Like, really, dude? Like, think about that whole scenario when you're that comfortable with combat and the carnage that it is. And to me, it was just kind of par for the course, like, oh, this is a fun time to make a joke. Like, really, man? You know? And that's one of the things that I've struggled with reconciling, because I realized how low of an esteem I held for the insurgents at that point. You know, I had no respect for them at all. And I was just more at that point annoyed that we had to fight them, because they didn't fight honorably. They didn't fight us fairly. You know, there was no like, I'm standing up for my belief and I'm here to fight for what I believe in, and you're here to fight for what you believe in. So from warrior to warrior, we have a respect for each other. We'll kill each other, but it's not like we don't respect each other. These guys would be like the most slimy, underhanded piece of shit type of a fight they could do is what they did. At least me anyway. I would look at them like, you know, you guys are children playing at war. You're not warriors. So for me to act that way with that guy was just kind of like, you know, whatever, you know, I'm going to rob this dead body and joke about his eyes getting pecked out as I'm running away from him. And, you know, not my proudest moment, I would say. But that's just kind of how it was at that point. We had descended into, because we'd been in combat for so long, we had descended into a mentality. We were really good at this. We had realized how superior we were, at least I had. It's not that we were impervious, like we couldn't get hurt. It's just that we were so much better at this than they were, that every time we met resistance, it was just overwhelming how accurate and ferocious we could be compared to what they were prepared to do. So the PsyOps guys, they had free reign of the battle space. They weren't attached to any unit. So they could be anywhere they wanted to and just kind of pass between battle space in areas of responsibility, right? And what they had done is they had rigged up their speakers on their Humvee to play AC/DC. So you would have like the entire battle was set to a soundtrack of AC/DC, where you'd be fighting, and then you just kind of see this Humvee randomly bahaing across the battle space, blasting Hell's Bells. And I remember there was a point in time where we were down to 19 guys left in the platoon. I had 2 NCOs left besides myself. And I had one on one side of the street, one on the other side of the street. And I'm having them kind of leapfrog. And as I'm coordinating in the street, I'm posted up on the side of one of the buildings, with my hand up kind of like GQ style. And I'm just kind of rocking out as I'm hearing like AC/DC in the background. And I'd be like, all right, hit that house. They hit it and a bunch of fire would take place. And I know a bunch of guys got killed. None of mine. All right, cool. Hey, go for it, man. It was so casual as I'm listening to AC/DC and we're just literally fucking up everybody in our path. I'm like, we're complete savages. We're mortal gods at this point. If I need to scale that wall, I can do it with 200 pounds on my back. I don't give a shit. Let's just fucking get it done. And when you're operating on that kind of a level, it's extremely addictive because it's like there's nothing you can't do. And you're so fucking good at this. You can play God, and you can just destroy everything in your path and nothing can stop you. All of that is false, of course. Like that's all a fallacy of the combat scene. And when all the fire stops and all the noise stops and you're left with your own demons, then all that stuff starts to come to light. But those were all things that I had to learn later on. At the time, as a young warrior, I was, MVP of the Super Bowl. We were just going for it and just everything in our path we were wiping out. It was great. Coming back from Fallujah, again, I had clicked everything off. I was numb. It was very difficult for me to process anything that wasn't as exciting as Fallujah. I just wasn't interested in it. So earlier when I was talking about my PTSD manifested in a different way, my PTSD manifests in apathy. I just don't care. I have the ability to completely shut that switch off and be like, oh, fucking well, yeah, these people just got splattered out in front of me. I don't know, it's not my monkey, not my circus. I don't care, which is not something I'm particularly proud of. But when I come back from a deployment like that, there's a lot of families that are grieving and, that were there, receive us even though their son or brother or husband had been killed, because we're all family. And so to see them grieving, it was very difficult for me to connect with them and acknowledge the grief that they were going through. I wasn't disrespectful about it, but I was still very much disconnected. And it wasn't until I was picked to eulogize the 4 guys in my platoon that got killed. And they were like, you're the only one that can actually verbalize all this stuff, man, so you got to do it. I got through the ceremony. I was able to eulogize all 4 of them. I had to write the eulogies for all of them. I went behind the bleachers at the battalion field house, or the division field house right there in Camp Lejeune. Went behind the bleachers and for about 3 hours was in the fetal position, bawling my eyes out, trying to reconcile the fact that I had just spoken about them for the last time that they would be spoken about in that manner on Camp Lejeune with our brother in there. And that was the first time I really had any kind of real release and was able to kind of take a bite out of the grief. I later realized that was not even the tip of the iceberg when it came to grieving. Not just those 4 guys, but we lost 13 in our company and 22 in the battalion. And I knew every one of them. So to actually metabolize that grief to this day, I'm barely scratching the surface, and I deal with it a lot better than most guys do. I mean, it's a lot to take on. My wife gave birth to my son when I was on my 3rd combat deployment. So I didn't meet him till he was 3 months old. But both those deployments, I was at that point in logistics. So I wasn't a door kicker anymore. I was on a battalion staff. I was the logistics chief for 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines at that point. So for me, the only significant thing that's really kind of worth talking about is I had a really good friend named Master Sergeant Mac, and the day he was killed was the day my son was born. So I joke with my son all the time because we're really close and we're buddies. I'm like, well, yeah, you're Master Sergeant Mac. You don't know it, but his spirit transferred to you because it was the day you were born. It was frustrating as all hell because after experiencing something like Fallujah, there are not a lot of Marines who have experienced 6 weeks of sustained combat. Actually, I don't know if anybody has. There's guys that have gone out, and obviously they've been deploying, and during their deployment, they had several patrols that they went out where they got ambushed. But a 6-week assault is a whole different mentality that you take on because there is no such thing as a downtime. There is no safe place. You are constantly pushing forward and killing and being killed. And then you push forward again and kill and be killed. And you push forward again for 6 weeks of that. So when I got put on battalion staff and I'm running logistics with guys who are not even infantry guys, even though they're attached to an infantry battalion, they have no concept of what I would call reality. I'm looking at things through a very different paradigm than they are. So it's frustrating as all hell because to them, if the trucks are late, the trucks are late, we're working on it. I'm like, okay, no, you don't fucking eat. You don't sleep. You don't care about anything until the grunts are taken care of. Because they're the ones that are out there fighting, dying, bleeding, and suffering because you can't get your head out of your ass. Which is why I wound up taking over the logistics shop. I was initially just supposed to be the facilities chief, where I took care of the barracks and the battalion buildings and that type of stuff because I'd gotten in trouble again. And so they were like, go up to the S4 shop and we're just going to make sure that your fit rep sucks so then we can demote you and kick you out of the Marine Corps is essentially what it was. I was being put out to pasture. And in the process, I wound up taking over the shop because my mentality was very much like I was a savage. After coming to something like Fallujah, there's no such thing as, okay, we're done with our training for the day. No, not a chance. If there's something more that can be done, it will be done. And, the Marines under the S4 and 1-2, they benefited from it. Everything else in my life suffered for it because I didn't care about anything except them. Because I've seen the result of what happens when, if there was one more lesson I could have taught any one of those guys that got hurt or killed. I changed fundamentally while I was in the Marine Corps. I was talking about before, that warrior mentality, that warrior culture. It's who I am, it's what I do, it's how I identify everything. And in a civilian world, it's out of place. It's out of sync. It's misunderstood. It's judged, feared. It's harder than combat, without question. Because everything is nuanced. It's all subtle and indirect. What I loved about being deployed and being in combat is that everything is very clear as far as what you should do. Here, in a civilian world, if you say something that offends somebody, you're gonna have to answer for that. And you might have to eat crow and apologize for something that's their fault. Or because you reacted in a manner that was considered to be triggering, or something along those lines, where it's just like, you can't call a piece of shit in the civilian world. You can't clear out the red tape to just really kick ass and get something done in the civilian world. There is no such thing as, I don't care how much it costs, I don't care what it takes, make it happen. We all celebrate it. It's a virtue. But if you actually try to enact something like that, it's actually extremely illegal to do. And if people find out about it, you'll either be fined or jailed for it. And so there's all these things that we as warriors will look at things as, say, this is a virtuous way to do this. We're celebrated for that. We're found to have merit because of this. That when you try to apply that in a civilian sector, it's highly frowned upon, highly feared, and ostracized or alienated. And then you add to that the fact that what we respect is something like strength. If we respect strength, that means you don't show weakness. Well, you don't show weakness, you don't need to show weakness anyway in a warrior culture, because there's about 100 guys that are watching you to make sure you're okay. Me as a leader, and we all do this, whether we realize it or not, but in the Marine Corps in particular, when you're walking, every single person you see, the first thing you do is you look at their face, then you look at their collar. And you look back at their face so you can render the appropriate greeting, whatever it's going to be. right? Well, if that's one of your Marines, you know what their face looks like every single time. And if there's something a little off in their energy, you pick up on it right away because you actually give a shit about them. So your initial response as a leader is to be like, hey, hardcore, you doing all right? Talk to me, what's going on? So if he's carrying something, he doesn't need to reach out to somebody, call the hotline at the VA and talk about how you're thinking about hurting yourself. We don't do that. Our platoon sergeant or our squad leader or our team leader or our buddy or all of them together at different point in time, we're going, hey, are you good? Sit down. What's wrong? Because we give a shit about each other. Well, here, that's an invasion of people's privacy. And so, if you have a secretary and she's going through a hard time and you pull in your office and you close the door, okay, you've now trapped her in your office while you admonished her. Like, really? But it could be construed that way. So you can't do that in a civilian world. You get yourself in trouble for doing that. What you can do is say, hey, I've noticed that maybe you're a little sad today and you might want to go talk to HR, and you really hope that lands with them. Okay, for me, that's so cheesy and so ineffective. Like, I wouldn't even attempt that. I'd be like, what is happening with you? How do I help you? But if she or he figures that I'm doing something wrong or doesn't like that, then my job is on the line. So what do we do as warriors trying to integrate in a civilian culture? We withdraw. I say, this is just too difficult. I don't understand any of it. I don't understand my family. I don't understand my friends. All the things that I thought were familiar are not familiar. And I don't like any of this. So we just withdraw. And the more we withdraw, the more depressed we get, the more angry we get, the more those demons start playing in our head. We find ourselves in these situations and these scenarios where we would rather become nothing and not try anything than blossom into what we know we can be, right? And continue to mature and become more effective at whatever it is our goals are. My transition has been long fought and wrought with failure. I mean, it's just one thing after another, you name it, between business, relationships, finances, physicality, emotions, spirituality, all of it, just everything at some point in time, at different times, some at the same time, have all crashed and burned, forced me to reanalyze and reboot every single one of them. And I had to completely reinvent myself. And I'm just now on the uptick of reinventing things because I just recently went nuclear on my entire life. And that was just all a result of me trying to cope with the fact that I am not allowed to be a warrior anymore. So I don't know how to identify with anything. I don't know where I stand in the world. So then what do? I pretend. So I pretend to be a husband. I pretend to be a manager. I pretend to be a good employee or a guy who builds houses or whatever. The whole thing is a freaking lie because I'm not allowed to really be who I really am. Otherwise, the amount of scrutiny I fall under and criticism that I fall under is not something I'm willing to withstand on a daily basis. So if I'm pretending, I'm able to at least make my way through the day-to-day. But essentially what I'm doing, another way to say pretend is to say you lie. So now I'm going against all my virtues and I'm lying to everybody around me. And if you start lying to everybody and you're living a lie, then you can lie about anything. So eventually that turns into a habit, and those habits turn into addictions, and then those addictions take over your life and completely destroy it, which is what happened to me. As a result of that, I have had to start learning, one, how to just completely humble myself and let go of my entire identity and rebuild it from scratch, from a standpoint of, okay, I don't need to please everybody. It's okay if I offend people to a certain degree, right? I can't just go out there and the first thing that pops into my head is what I say, even though that happens quite a bit. But I can't just do that. And I have to find something that I care about more than anything else. And where I found myself was the only thing I've ever cared about more besides my son is my guys. And what I see happening is the suffering and misunderstanding that's taking place, that we all need help desperately. None of us know how to ask for it. And the only answers for the most part that are out there are civilian answers to warrior problems. And we wonder why the VA doesn't resonate with any of us. I mean, maybe some people out there it does, but I know my guys can't stand the VA. And the whole purpose of the VA is to help us. Well, why doesn't the VA resonate with us? Well, because they're going to assign you a counselor that if you really divulge what you're thinking, they're going to have to mandatorily report you. And then they're going to pump you full of drugs, take away all your purpose, give you a bunch of money so you don't have to have a purpose. And then you spend the rest of your life drooling on yourself in some dark corner someplace, wondering what the fuck until you commit suicide, which is why our suicide rates are so freaking high. We need tasks, we need purposes. If we don't have those things, we lose our way. It's really simple equation. And so I've come to realize recently that, because we're having reunions and we're starting to reach out to each other. It's been 20 years since Fallujah, right? So we're starting to reach out again and we're starting to reconnect. And it's dawned on me, the only ones that can really connect with us and resonate with us the way that we need are the ones we actually served with. The guy you shared that fighting hole with, that's going to be the one who has permission to say, hey, you're fucking up, dude, stop. And for you to go, shit, you're right. Okay. You could have a PhD. I could have been talking to you for years. And if you're like, hey, you're fucking up, you need to stop. I'm like, you don't even fucking get it. What do you mean I'm fucking up? You don't even know that you're going to have to go repent because you used the F word. Like, really? You and me ain't the same. And you're always going to feel that way with them. And even if it's another veteran, you'll connect on some levels. But you're never going to connect with that guy whose farts you had to smell for months on end, right? Or the one that, is talking to you about something that happened with his girlfriend and you're like, yeah, been there. You did her too? Yeah, dude. And you're joking about it. Like, that is the guy who you have given permission to say those things to you and it's actually going to resonate. So I've recently quit my job and I've decided to completely focus on veterans' mental health. It's the only thing I care about enough to actually get me up in the morning, because again, I kind of have that all or nothing mentality, right? So I can't just go to job and punch a clock and work 9 to 5 and find any kind of fulfillment with that. I don't care what it is. I could build a freaking mansion. Doesn't matter to me. Watching guys who are suffering get the help that they need, that's everything to me. So I started a clothing line, an apparel line, a bunch of podcasts and things like that. But the whole purpose of everything that I'm doing is to reconnect veterans with the guys that they actually served with and to position the guys that they served with the understanding like, look, you don't have to be perfect, but you got to understand what you meant to this guy. And you've got to commit to staying involved in their life the way you used to be. If you were an NCO when you had guys, do you think that just because you got out, you don't have those responsibilities anymore? Because we'd all like to think it's that clean cut. It's not. If the only guy that can tell me that I'm fucking up is my squad leader, then I need my squad leader in my life still to tell me I'm fucking up, if that's what I'm doing. Because he's the only one that can do it, right? And I'm going to hear it from him differently than I'm going to hear it from anybody else. I would even go so far as to say it is mandatory for us to really complete our healing and to get back to who we know we can be, to have those people still in our lives again. The lowest I've been was last May of 23. I had completely fallen in love with a woman. I'm going through divorce, right? So prematurely, I'm head over heels in love with this other woman. I had spun this gorgeous web of lies to where I was remodeling a house that I had bought with my partner. We were making it from a duplex into a triplex in a really desirable area. So I was going to sell for a whole bunch of money when we were done. Everything was going to work out great. I was fooling around with a bunch of different women because I'm just newly divorced. So I'm like, I'm on the market. Screw it. It's time to play. Every one of them I had told I'm not looking for a relationship. But then at the same time, every one of them I had led to believe I might be that guy that is the one they're in a relationship with, and conveniently left out a bunch of details. One of these women I had completely fallen in love with. When the time came and the ball dropped, one of the other women I was screwing around with had literally decided and sent me the text message, I'm going to destroy your life. And she did. She took a wrecking ball to the entire house of cards that I had built, blew my entire identity out of the water. Everything that I had pretended to be, everything that I had lied about, everything. She just open forum out there for the world to see. And I hit what I call a point of singularity, where I imploded and exploded at the exact same time. I went supernova. And I wound up, figuratively speaking, face down, butt naked in front of my creator, where there were no lies, there were no explanations, there were no yeah, but, none of that. It was just straight up black and white truth. You are or you are not. The only way that I was able to start crawling my way back to the surface from that was to completely face the truth. Because we like to believe that we are certain things. You know, we all have this image that we try to portray to people, you know. Like we were talking about before, you were saying like when you interview somebody or when you hire somebody to help you out with something, like that's our best foot, right? That's our best side. And that's what we like to project to everybody out there. When in reality, we're all extremely insecure and manipulative, and we lie on a regular basis for reasons that we probably couldn't even tell you at the point in time that we're doing it, but it just makes us feel better or look better or whatever the reason, whatever justification that we use to do what we do. Well, to have all that stripped away and to hit a point where, okay, you are literally about to be reborn and your identity is about to get rebooted because everybody in your life despises you and can't stand you because of all the crap you've pulled for your own selfish gain. I had to have 19 separate conversations, and some of them I'm still having, with people who I had completely manipulated and lied to. When the weight of that hit me was my lowest point. And I spent about 3 weeks bawling my eyes out and completely incapable of functioning, like as a human. I didn't care about hygiene. I didn't care about functionality, production at work, none of that. I just didn't care who I reached out or who I talked to or whatever. I mean, you know, your cell phone dies. Your teeth are hurting because you haven't brushed your teeth. You know, you feel grimy and sweaty and gross because you haven't showered in 2 weeks because you just don't care. It wasn't that I was suicidal. I just didn't care about anything. So if I died, yeah, so I would lie about anything. You know, I was a partner in a company that was remodeling a house. I'd lie about production on the house. My partner wasn't on scene, so they couldn't see what I was talking about. So I would lie about it and make things seem better than they were. I would enter into agreements with people knowing full well I couldn't fulfill them. But it made me feel good to be the guy that they said yes, you know, because, oh my God, you're amazing. And I get this immediate kick of like, yeah, I am amazing. You're right. It's a freaking lie. I can't do it. I would do anything I could to please people around me because for so long I was so miserable inside. It made me feel good to be the yes man for people. So then I just became spineless. You know, wherever the wind blew is where I would go. So I became known as somebody who never kept his word, who was completely unreliable, you know, would tell you that things were this way when they were really another way. So when I say I'd lie about anything, I mean, I'll put it to you like this. When I started coming clean about things, the way the conversation would go was this. I'm sure I've lied to you about things. I have no idea what I've lied to you about. This one thing we're talking about right now, I know that was a lie. To which the normal response would be, well, what else have you lied to me about? And I'd be like, I don't even know. The layers of this onion we'll find out. As long as you're willing to take that trip with me, we'll find out. And sure enough, a couple weeks later, here comes another one. Oh, yeah, I lied about that. Okay, a couple weeks later, here comes another one. Well, how many of those do you go through before that person's just so fed up with you that they're like, just get out of my life? And that's the point where I was on the floor bawling my eyes out. There's so many people in my life I had done that to that had rejected me at that point. It was my worst fear coming true. It's a newfound courage. It's like a mental muscle, right? So it starts off, it's very atrophied, it's very weak. And every decision you make is like another rep that you do with a weight, right? So it's not like you make a decision once. That's like, you know, if you grab a dumbbell and you do one curl, like that's never gonna do anything. Hundreds of times a day, you have to work that muscle out to grow that muscle to be strong. And what that muscle is to turn towards the pain and the fact that I'm not all things to all people, and that's okay. And that's kind of what I was getting at earlier when I said, like, I might say something that offends you. I need to be okay with that. And if you don't like it, then you don't like it. And if I need to apologize later on, I can let that be what it is and I'll apologize later on. But if that's where I'm at in that moment, I have to live that truth. Because if I try to subsidize that truth, then for me anyway, I'm starting to go down that path again where I'm starting to try to like people please. And I'm starting to live those lies again. You know, it's a slippery slope for me. So for me, it just has to be like blunt honesty. This is what it is. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. Terribly sorry about that. What do you want me to do about it? Let's move on from there. What are we doing now? But it has to be stated what it is. Exercising that on a daily basis has been, at first, absolutely terrifying. But then I've started to realize how liberating it is, because I don't have to hide anything anymore. And all of the energy that I was spending trying to perpetuate this lie, I don't have to spend that energy anymore. I'm able to free up that energy and focus on something that actually matters with it now, which is the veterans' mental health. What I've started doing, like I said, I quit my job because that was a lie. I don't care about construction. I did construction for 12 years. I got pretty good at it. I couldn't care less about your house. I mean, honestly, I'll go in and I'll work it, but I'm not going to stay up obsessing about getting it perfect. You know, it's your house. If you don't like it, then so what? You can't do anything about it. So why do I care about it? That's literally how I genuinely feel about it, which is an asshole thing to say, but it's true. I had to ask the question, well, what do I care about? You know, what is going to get me up, and what do I want to get perfect? What will I obsess about? You know, like you with the camera angles, and like, you know, I need to have that kind of enthusiasm about anything that I do, or I'm not going to do it. And what that is, of course, is veterans' mental health. So it's occurred to me that the VA is trying to answer warrior problems with civilian answers, and it misses. And we need to start reconnecting veterans with the guys they actually served with, so that we can reestablish these communities and we can start growing again and being around the people who we have given permission to criticize us, and who we look up to in a way that we don't look up to anybody else around us. My efforts to do that have been a few different things. And I'll try to make this as simple as I can. So the first initiative is what I call the Eulogy Project, or the Eulogy Challenge. The Eulogy Challenge is essentially if you had found out that somebody had been killed or somebody died, and there was something that you wish you had told them before they perished, this is an opportunity for you to tell them those things while they're still alive. And the idea behind this is that we always wait for someone to die before we say what they meant to us. So there's a lot of guys out there that are suffering and going through these things where they're at these various stages of, you know, recovery and depression or shame or whatever. They're hiding in a hole. And to have somebody who they respect and look up to say, you always meant these things to me, it might just be that thing that kind of shakes the tree enough to get them to shake their head and, okay, give them the strength to stand up and carry on that day. You know, so the idea of the challenge is that if I eulogize you, then you now need to pick somebody and eulogize them, and find somebody that meant something to you and say that to them while they're still alive, so you can start speaking that healing into their life. So that's the first initiative. The second one is, there was a guy who messaged me. I haven't talked to him in 20 some years. I looked him up after he'd messaged me, and he'd gone through some really hard times. And like most of us, especially the guys in Fallujah, almost every single one of us has completely destroyed our lives. Like, there's a very select few who haven't, but I'd say like 98% of us have destroyed our lives in one way, shape, or form. What I'm gonna do is, I decided I want to Ed McMahon this guy. And I want to show up at his door with a bunch of money and a bunch of people who he served with, and I want to get him back on track. And essentially what I'm going to do, I'm not just going to hand him a check, but I'm going to have resources so that I can say, you know, like, okay, look, man, this is who we know you are. This is who you were when you served with us. So we know this is the guy you can be. All right, so we're here to nudge you back in that direction and get you moving in that direction again. And we're going to stay committed, and we're going to stay in your life to hold you accountable, to get you there. So, you know, is your car payment behind? Let's get that paid up. Let's get your credit cards paid up. Let's get your phone turned back on. Is there an education program that you can't get tuition for, that you didn't have tuition for? Okay, we're going to get all that stuff paid up to $10,000. And I just picked $10,000 because when I made the business model, I'm selling these t-shirts for $100 a piece. But for every dollar that the company keeps, I'm able to give $2 to one of these guys. And I want to do this for 12 people over the next 12 months. The idea behind that, again, is to show up with the people who they served with, surround them with support and love that they need, so then they can get back on their feet, moving in the right direction. And it does things twofold. One, it's for the guy who needs to get back on his feet. But it's also re-engaging that small unit leadership that we're so used to. And I don't know if you've been a small unit leader if you're watching, but I know you have been. When you're back in that leadership role again, your life gets purpose again as well. So you're more likely to work out get the house a little bit cleaner or take care of that one little thing that's going to get in the way of you doing what you need to do to take care of your guy again. So because we've all lost our purpose once we got out, the way I've described this before, it takes a year right about for a Marine to be indoctrinated into a warrior culture. From the time you're in MEPS to the time where you actually know your ass from the hole in the ground when you're in the fleet, it's about a year. Well, then one day, all of that culture just disappears. It's just gone. All that support, all the way of looking at things. The way it happened for me was I turned my key in, I turned my meal card in, and then all of a sudden, I didn't have anywhere to go. So I just left. Like, that's literally what it was. It was this very unceremonious, get the fuck out. Well, I have completely wrapped my mind, my soul, my life, everything around this idea that all of a sudden it's just gone. So of course I'm lost. I'm set up for failure. Like, I don't know how to function in a different way. To re-engage that and say, look, this guy needs help. He was one of your guys. Let's get back involved with his life. And I don't mean like knee deep in his Cheerios, but I do mean you're calling on him and you're checking on him and you're reconnecting and you're helping me get him back on his feet. Reestablish these communities, one fire team at a time, if you will. And reviving that veteran community with the only people that really have permission to do so, which is the guys we served with. The VA ain't gonna do it. No psychiatrist is gonna do it. All these people who mean well aren't gonna do it. So I've got 2 different websites. I would go to battlecryfreedomapparel.com. That's gonna be where the story is, where you'll see the links to the videos of me making the shirts, delivering the money. You can follow the stories. Shattered Heroes is the YouTube channel where you'll see the people that we're helping out. And you'll follow the story of them, and we'll follow up with them 3 months later. And so you can kind of see the aftermath of it and how they're doing now and that type of stuff. I would just say that apathy is your enemy, right? Complacency kills. And for all of us to go on believing that we don't need to be involved in each other's lives anymore is an absolute lie. And there's a reason why 20 of us commit suicide every day. And that is a completely unacceptable number. We don't have to suffer this way, but it's going to take you getting off your ass to go do something. Enough of the sentiment, enough of the nice words. If you were a small unit leader and you're not reaching out to your guys, you're not doing your job because they need you. It's the end of the line right there.